Hey guys, tonight we're going to tiptoe back into the candlelit bedrooms of the Victorian era, where things aren't quite as prim and proper as your high school textbook made them seem. Picture this: thick velvet curtains choking out the moonlight, an uncomfortable feather mattress that's suspiciously lumpy, and the soft hiss of a gas lamp casting shadows that make you question if that chair just moved on its own. You brush your teeth? Well, no, not really. You might just rinse with a dash of baking soda water and call it a night. Then you settle into your modest wooden bed frame, hoping that the bed bugs, a very real problem, don't see your soft limbs as an invitation. But don't worry, the arsenic-infused wallpaper may take care of those little pests and you. Sleep tight. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me in the comments, where are you listening from and what time is it for you right now? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge across the creaking wooden floor of your rented London flat, the air tinged with the musty scent of coal smoke and old wool. It's been hours since dinner, usually eaten early to allow digestion, because doctors said sleeping on a full stomach could trigger nightmares or sudden death. No pressure. By the time you reach the bedroom, the gas lights have already been dimmed. You twist the valve slowly, reducing the flame until it flickers, casting long shadows across the room. Those shadows stretch and yawn like silent house guests, waiting for you to finally stop pacing and get into bed. This is the golden age of nighttime paranoia. Everything must be just so. You close the windows. Cold night air was believed to carry illness, though curiously, many still insisted on sleeping with a slight draft for vitality. You pull the thick drapes, not just for warmth, but to block out the gaze of the judgmental moon. Yes, people were actually wary of sleeping under its full glow, believing it could unbalance the humors or invite lunacy, hence the term lunatic. You change out of your day wear with great care. If you're wealthy, your lady's maid or valet assists. If you're not, you untie your corset with hands already aching from laundry and hearth tending. Your night clothes are linen or cotton, possibly monogrammed if you're fancy. And they're long, like ankle-length tunics, designed to keep everything properly covered in case of a fire or unexpected midnight visitor. And here's a weirdly comforting thought, that fire isn't unlikely. Those same gas lamps? They exploded occasionally. Your flannel nightgown? Highly flammable. Still, it's considered proper bedtime fashion. The fashionable poor might make do with day shirts or worn underskirts, but everyone, regardless of class, agrees you should be properly dressed for unconsciousness. Historians still argue whether night clothes were truly standardized by class or more regionally varied, but across most of Britain, decent attire was vital. A house fire was not just an emergency, it was a social performance. You couldn't be seen fleeing into the street half-dressed. Scandalous. As you settle into bed, let's talk about that, shall we? The bed. Likely a solid wooden frame, sometimes four-poster, sometimes just a creaky box with a slightly tilted mattress. The mattress might be stuffed with straw if you're poor, or horsehair and feathers if you're better off. Either way, you're probably not thrilled about it. There are lumps. There are smells. There are questionable stains. And above it all, a heavy canopy or mosquito netting might drape, not just to keep out insects, but to keep in warmth. Entire families sometimes slept in the same bed for body heat or to save space. If you're lucky enough to have your own bed, you lie diagonally because the mattress dips in the center. You've learned to angle for spinal survival. You turn to blow out the candle. Slowly, carefully. One puff, maybe two. Don't inhale. Some of the cheaper candles are laced with tallow that smells like roast beef and regret. The wealthier homes have beeswax, which gives off a softer glow and a gentler scent, like someone with money who doesn't need to prove it. Then you settle in. Kind of. You rearrange the pillows. Maybe add a bolster under your knees. Yes, Victorians loved their oddly shaped pillows. There are at least 3 going on right now. And maybe a hot brick wrapped in flannel at your feet, because even if you're wearing socks, the chill from under the floorboards seeps through like an icy accusation. And now we wait. You might lie there in silence, letting the faint tick of the mantle clock lull you. Or you might pray, reciting a whispered litany not just for safety, but for a good death, should you not wake in the morning. Not uncommon. Bedtime was often when mortality was most on the mind. Plagues, infections, sudden illness. Death had a habit of arriving in the small hours. Sometimes, you even rehearse how you want to be remembered. A touching letter hidden under your pillow. A favorite brooch pin just so. Or maybe you don't think about it at all. Maybe you just fixate on the way your neighbor's cat keeps meowing like it knows something you don't. Outside, the street's quieter now. Horse hooves on cobblestone have faded. The occasional clatter of a carriage while passing by feels oddly cozy, reminding you that the city breathes even when you're still. You close your eyes and try not to think about the shadows. You open your eyes, just a crack. It's colder now. The fire in the hearth has dimmed to glowing embers, and the air in the bedroom has shifted. You curl deeper under the covers, your toes searching out that warm brick at the foot of the bed, only to find it's gone cool. The draft is back, slipping through the window pane or creeping beneath the door like it's on a mission. You'd like to believe your home is airtight, but this is Victorian architecture. Everything breathes, squeaks, or leaks. Those charming wood-framed windows don't seal properly, and your walls, solid-looking as they are, aren't insulated. You can practically hear the cold settling in, cracking the air like it's laying claim to your bones. Still, you're not meant to seal yourself in. That would be dangerous, they say. Air must circulate. Night air may be a killer, but so is stale air. It's a delicate balance between breathing in miasma or suffocating slowly under tightly drawn curtains. Doctors flip-flop on the matter depending on the decade. Historians still argue whether this obsession with fresh yet not too fresh air stemmed more from science or superstition. Either way, you follow the protocol. You've left a gap in the window just wide enough for a polite ghost to slip through. And let's not forget the chamber pot. You know it's sitting beneath the bed, waiting, dignified, floral perhaps. These weren't always crude affairs. Wealthier Victorians commissioned porcelain pots with gold rims and even hand-painted inspirational sayings, like, "Blessed are the meek," or "Do not tarry." You wonder if they expected you to reflect on your character while relieving yourself at 2 a.m. This is your bathroom tonight. There's no trip down the hall. No modern flush or soft lighting. Just a quick shuffle to the edge of the mattress, a practiced lift of the skirts or untie of the drawstring, and you're balancing on porcelain in the moonlight. All very graceful. Very poised. If you're lucky, it's not freezing. In less affluent homes, the pot might be shared by several family members. It's emptied by hand in the morning, usually by the youngest child or the most put-upon domestic. In cities, its contents might be flung into a shared outdoor privy or dumped into the street's open gutters. You do your best not to think about that. The most luxurious homes have an actual water closet, perhaps even a pull-chain toilet. A marvel, but also terrifyingly loud, and no one wants to wake the household. Silence, above all, is the nighttime law. So, chamber pots it is. You climb back into bed, blanket pulled up to your chin, shivering a little. You think of the extra blanket in the wardrobe, woven wool, heavy, slightly itchy. You should have grabbed it earlier, but now your feet have found a tolerable position and you're not sure it's worth risking the cold shock of floorboards again. Besides, you've done the proper thing. Before bed, you folded your clothing just so. Never leave your garments in a pile. That's how spirits find their way into them. Not everyone believes that, of course, but your grandmother did. And superstition has a way of clinging, especially at night. In rural areas, some still sweep around the bed 3 times before sleep to ward off evil. Others leave bread and salt at the windowsill to keep witches from entering. It's all nonsense, you tell yourself, right as a floorboard creaks with no clear cause. Maybe it's the cat. You don't have a cat. Anyway, you're trying to focus on your breathing. Slow up. That's what the doctor recommended after your last fainting spell. Nervous exhaustion, he called it. Women's bodies, he said, weren't built for too much mental activity after sunset. Which is rich, considering men stayed up all night writing essays about why women needed less stimulation. So you think slow thoughts. Cows. Mushrooms. Teacups. It's not working. You turn again. Another draft curls up the side of the mattress. Your nightshirt rides up a little. You pull it down, grumble under your breath, and think, not for the first time, how unfair it is that the working classes had to deal with all of this while also getting up before sunrise to light the fires and scrub someone else's floors. They couldn't afford coal for heat all night. Many couldn't even afford proper bedding. They layered old coats over themselves, curled around one another like parentheses. A human semicolon, if you will. Some burned whatever they could find to keep warm. Old shoes, newspaper, even dung. Ever wake up with a sore throat and wondered if it was just the cold or slow arsenic poisoning from last night's fire? Welcome to Victorian bedtime. Still, even the wealthy weren't safe. The most elegant homes had their own hazards. Tapestries and thick curtains soaked in years of gaslight residue. Beds placed near windows where cold could seep through ornate but impractical glass. Entire bedrooms were designed for fashion over comfort. That chaise lounge looks beautiful but will dislocate your spine in under 10 minutes. And yet, some of them loved it. The ritual of it all. The chilly stoicism. The pride in not complaining. In upper-class circles, it became a badge of refinement to suffer gracefully. Oh yes, I sleep with my windows open, even in winter. Yes, I wear only one blanket, even when it snows. Yes, I enjoy the bracing bite of a good January draft. It builds character. That's why you all have consumption. You shiver again, thinking you might actually survive this night only to perish of pride. Eventually, you settle into stillness. You've found the warmest angle of the mattress. The draft has shifted its attack to the far corner. The chamber pot slumbers peacefully in its porcelain cave. All is, for the moment, quiet. But now your mind drifts to tomorrow. You'll need to wake early. There's the market, the laundry, the dusting. Or maybe you're one of the lucky ones who'll merely need to attend a morning social and pretend not to be exhausted while wearing 6 pounds of lace. Either way, you've got to sleep. Just as soon as you stop hearing that one floorboard creak again. You wake with a start, not from a sound exactly, but from a presence, a subtle shift in the air, as if something unseen just stepped out of the wall. You blink, adjusting to the darkness, half expecting to see someone sitting in the corner of the room. Just the chair. Just your coat draped across the back. Probably. You remind yourself that nighttime hallucinations were not uncommon in the Victorian era. In fact, they were practically expected. Hypnagogia, the in-between state when you're not quite asleep and not quite awake, often conjured the bizarre. A woman floating at the foot of the bed. A disembodied hand reaching for the quilt. It was the perfect blend of sleep paralysis, a poor diet, and a lot of repressed feelings. Victorian sleep wasn't one continuous 8-hour block, by the way. That's a modern invention, courtesy of electric lighting and industrial schedules. Back then, it was common to sleep in 2 segments, first sleep and second sleep. You'd rest a few hours after dusk, wake up around midnight, and then spend 1 or 2 hours in a kind of twilight consciousness before dozing off again until dawn. You're in that gap now, between the 2 sleeps. People in this window often read religious tracts, said their prayers, or even got a bit of housework done. More eccentric folks claimed they received visions, messages from ancestors, angels, or even the odd cryptic warning about soup. Historians still argue whether this waking period was used for creative reflection or just unavoidable insomnia dressed up as productivity. So, what do you do now? You lie there, staring up at the ceiling. Victorian bedrooms often had intricately plastered ceilings, rosettes, vines, flourishes. Not because people spent more time looking up, necessarily, but because wealthy Victorians loved ornamentation. Of course, by gaslight or moonlight, those floral designs cast eerie shadows. You once mistook a rose motif for a spider the size of your hand. You shift again, and the bed springs groan beneath you. You're not alone in this nocturnal orchestra. In homes across the city, people are stirring from their first sleep, yawning into darkness, lighting a candle, and tending to quiet tasks. Some even slip outside. Night walking was surprisingly common. Not always sleepwalking, though that too was a favorite topic of horror novels, but conscious nighttime activity. Servants sometimes used this hour to stoke the kitchen hearth or prepare bread dough. Farmers checked livestock. Even city dwellers might take short walks, believing the night air could sharpen the senses and cleanse the soul, unless it gave you consumption, of course. Some used this midnight space for more clandestine things. Letters written by candlelight, secret romances, meetings with spiritualists. Oh yes, the Victorians loved their ghosts. You think back to that neighbor who insists her husband's ghost visits her every night at 12:37. She leaves a chair open and places a glass of port on the windowsill. You're not sure which is more unsettling, the ghost or the routine. Speaking of which, you reach for the small diary tucked beside your bed. It's bound in worn leather, the corners curled, and the pages whisper softly as you flip them open. Victorians often kept journals of dreams or nighttime thoughts, believing the mind in this state was closer to truth or madness. Your writing is uneven. A few dried ink splatters mark last week's entry, dreamt of bees in the walls again. Must ask the doctor if that's meaningful or just the herring. You chuckle softly. This second sleep window is when strange ideas arrive. Some of history's most eccentric bedtime rituals were born in these hours. Lord Byron reportedly wrote poetry by candlelight while wrapped in heavy furs. Florence Nightingale did calculations for hospital airflow. Others listened for tapping sounds, a common sign that spirits were trying to make contact. You lie back, trying to decide whether to blow out the candle again or let it burn. There's barely an inch left, and it might not make it through to morning. You're torn between preserving wax and fearing the dark. Classic Victorian conundrum. The house creaks again. The wind taps gently at the window. Just a breeze. Probably. You think of those who lived entirely alone, spinsters, widows, bachelors, whose nights stretched even longer without a companion's breathing to ground them. Solitude at this hour could turn introspective or unraveling. Many Victorians believed the devil worked hardest between midnight and 3 a.m. The witching hour, some called it. Of course, it could also just be indigestion. Late-night snacks weren't common, but they weren't unheard of either. A glass of milk, a slice of seed cake, something to keep the stomach settled and the dreams less ferocious. You vaguely regret that slice of pickled herring earlier. It's staging a protest march down your esophagus. You swing your feet over the side of the bed, shiver, and shuffle toward the dresser. Not for food, just to move. Some physicians advised nighttime pacing to ease restless minds. Just 20 steps back and forth. No more, lest it turn you into a romantic poet, and we can't have that. As you turn, you glance at the mirror, and instantly regret it. Mirrors were often covered at night in many households. Some believed they could trap the soul. Others feared that if you died in your sleep with a mirror uncovered, your spirit might be caught forever staring back at itself. That's a tough eternity. You drape a cloth over it, just in case. Then back to bed. You nestle into the indent you made earlier, warm now, familiar. The wind's calmed a little, or maybe your nerves have. The second sleep waits just ahead, quiet and heavy-lidded. Maybe you'll dream this time. Of candlelit halls. Of muffled footsteps. Of women in white gliding through drawing rooms, always just out of reach. Or maybe it'll be bees again. Hard to say. Either way, you pull the blanket tighter around your shoulders and exhale slowly. The clock ticks. The candle sputters once, then steadies. Somewhere outside, a horse snorts. The city sleeps again, and now, so do you. You lie in bed, eyes half open, listening to the soft groan of your door's old iron latch. In daylight, you barely notice it, just another piece of hardware. At night, though, it takes on a life of its own, creaking warnings that unseen things might be slithering outside. You shift under the covers and slide out of bed, each movement a silent negotiation with the quilt and spring mattress. Reaching the door, you pull it closed with deliberate care. The latch clicks into place, satisfyingly loud in the hush of the bedroom. You pause, hand on the knob, because Victorians took door security quite seriously. Not for burglars, to keep the living out, but to keep the dead in. Or more accurately, to keep wandering spirits from entering your private chamber. It's a little-known fact that many houses came equipped with special spirit traps built into door frames, tiny grooves meant to confuse ghosts and prevent them from sliding in smoothly. Historians still argue whether these were functional or purely superstitious relics. You press your ear against the thick oak door. Nothing but your own breathing, the distant drip of the chamber pot liquid sloshing when you stirred earlier, and the faint hum of gas lamps puncturing darkness down the hall. Your heart settles a notch, but your nerves linger taut, like piano wire. In this moment, you're living proof of a centuries-old compromise. Doors locked not for privacy, but for supernatural safety. It's ironically comforting. You imagine some restless spirit pacing the corridor, trying to remember if it left the tea cozy on your writing desk. After all, by this era, ghost stories were more popular than afternoon tea, and countless Victorians believed that the dead spent nights revisiting homes they'd once inhabited, sampling hearth warmth, maybe eavesdropping on conversation, or more alarmingly, attaching themselves to sleeping bodies. You run your fingertips along the doorframe, recalling your grandmother's warning, "Never sleep with the key inside the lock, dear." Ghosts know which way is in and out. Quirky as it sounds, some families even kept a ritual key by the bedside, iron, worn, and never used for any real lock. You happen to have one, tucked beneath your pillow, alongside that hastily scribbled letter you prepared in case you didn't wake up. Practical and chilling. You step back into bed, settling your legs in that familiar diagonal incline, the one that contours to your spine and comforts you like an old friend. You remember the night before when you nearly spilled the chamber pot, thankfully saved by lightning-fast reflexes at 1:03 a.m., and the scrape of your ceramic knight, floral pattern, surprisingly elegant, against the floorboards. Sleep training, Victorian style. Once you're nestled, you pull the quilt up to your chest and clasp the iron key in your hand. It's cold, reassuringly so, like holding a tiny anchor against the tide of supernatural worry. You twist it gently, imagining it locking down your apartment against any spirit foolish enough to approach. Outside, the house sighs, a timbered exhalation as it settles over centuries of use. Floorboards creak as if to remind you that the building remembers every footstep ever taken within its walls. You gulp, because dumb jokes aside, some say old houses genuinely harbor echoes of emotions long past. A sob here, a whispered argument there, a lullaby sung by a doting mother who never saw her child grow up. If walls could talk, the Victorians argued, they might reveal more than any diary. You feel a tickle of regret that you flipped off that upstairs speaker last week, you know, the one playing modern sleep music all night. If you'd known spirits were real, you'd have left some classical harp recordings to soothe them instead. They probably prefer something calm, Mozart, maybe a sonic olive branch. Your blanket's rough weave grazes your cheek as you turn your head toward the wall. You squint, convinced for a moment that the floral wallpaper's vine pattern is shifting. It's not. Just your imagination, or perhaps that late-night cough from the neighbor downstairs. You remind yourself that nightly chills and visual distortions are often down to poor circulation or gaslight flicker. Still, it's hard to ignore the stories. Phantom footsteps pacing above children's bedrooms, disembodied whispers beckoning visitors to follow them down empty hallways, and, even more unsettling, spectral hands descending onto beds to... Let's not think too hard about that. In one particularly outlandish tale you once read, a gentleman woke to find his bedclothes yanked away as though a corpse were pulling at them. He bolted upright, only to see a pale face peering in from the corner. Afterward, he installed a mirror directly opposite the bed to frighten off spirits, reasoning that ghosts hate their own reflections. Modern ghost hunters scoff at the idea, of course, but back then, the tactic was fairly widespread. Historians still argue whether household mirrors were used strategically against supernatural trespassers or simply covered to prevent souls from wandering off permanently. You glance at the covered mirror across the room. Under that drape lies the potential prison for any wandering soul, just waiting for you to lift the cloth. You resist the urge. No need to advertise your defenses. You tuck the key into your fist, comforted by its weight. Inhale. Exhale. You focus on your pulse, the rhythmic thump in your ears as the house grows quieter. The gaslight outside your door dims to a soft halo. The night itself seems to respect your precautions. Suddenly, you remember the hair ritual, the 100 strokes your aunts insisted on before bed, meant to keep you tidy and spirit-free. Back then, combing your hair by candlelight was half beauty routine, half exorcism. You giggle silently at the memory, accidentally dislodging a pillow. It clunks on the floor. You wince. At least it's just you rustling. No phantom drop of water, no ghostly footstep. You lift the pillow, arrange it back under your head, and calm the trembling of your shoulder. You tell yourself, it's all in your head. A combination of fear, drafts, and that questionable late-night tonic you sipped earlier. And yet, you feel a presence behind you, a warmth not from the brick bed warmer, but something else. A prickle along your nape. You whip your head around, expecting to see someone, or something, hovering. Nothing. Just the wall and the draped tapestry you forgot existed. You take in a slow, steady breath and tell your heart to stop dramatizing. Then you place your other hand on the door's latch point, feeling the wood grain beneath your fingertips. But secure. You give the key a reassuring squeeze. Back into bed, you lie absolutely still, eyes tracing the ceiling's plaster rose. The ghost traps in the doorframe, the iron key, the drawn drapes, all your defenses are in place. That should suffice. If any spirits are lurking, they'll find their way barred by a century's worth of superstition lined up like sentries. Your breathing evens out. The key grows too heavy to hold, and you let it fall onto your chest, nestling between lace and cotton. It makes a tiny click against your stays. The sound is almost comforting now, proof that something solid exists in this room. Finally, the exhaustion overtakes you. Your lids flutter shut as the latch's echo fades. The midnight hour has been survived. You've outwitted the wandering dead, for now. And in these quiet moments, you dare to hope that tomorrow morning, the world will look a little less filled with creaks and phantoms, and a little more like that gaslit drawing room where you started tonight. You stir beneath the layered quilts, feeling stifled in cotton and linen that feel as heavy as a burial shroud. You remember the valet's admonition earlier that day, "Mind the nightshirts, sir, those dyed with emerald hues have arsenic in them." You roll onto your side, the fabric rustling like autumn leaves, and wonder if proper bedtime fashion is worth a slow poisoning. Victorian nightwear was a statement, after all, and fashion trends trickled down through every layer of society. Wealthy ladies and gentlemen prized those vivid greens and blues, convinced the more vibrant the dye, the higher the social standing. Mainstream dyers used copper-based verdigris for green and Prussian blue pigments for deep indigo, but in the exuberance to outshine one's neighbor, some manufacturers mixed in arsenic compounds, known for intensifying color and lowering cost. By the mid-1800s, arsenic green wallpaper was even dubbed Sheely's green after its discoverer, and everyone from elegant duchesses to humble seamstresses coveted the shade. You press your fingertips to the embroidered cuff of your nightgown, feeling the stiff edges where stitching meets fabric. It's oddly crisp, as though someone starched it with more fervor than necessary. Behind your eyelids, you play out the horrifying rumors. The lady in the house across the way whose emerald curtains slowly poisoned her children, her deathbed confession muttering that beauty was murder. You shudder, all the more aware of the quilt's oppressive weight. Despite the danger, the trend spread like wildfire. You might argue that arsenic green textile was merely a passing fad, but that would undermine how deeply vanity drove Victorian society. Even the Queen's own silk gowns occasionally carried invisible toxins. Historians still argue whether manufacturers intentionally marketed arsenic-dyed fabrics as a luxury or merely covered up the side effects to maintain profit margins. Tonight, you're wearing a simple linen nightshirt, not emerald, but stained faintly by coal smoke and previous oily washes. You imagine a richer counterpart in some upper-crust palace. Floor-length satin terminals laced with black silk trims and phosphorescent paints that glowed faintly by candlelight, another dazzling novelty that could warp eyesight if used excessively. You count yourself lucky it's plain fabric. Plain, but probably not harmless. After all, arsenic compounds were also used in the satin white, dyes prized for mimicking moonlight on boudoirs. You shift again, the mattress bulging beneath you like an unsettled marsh. The thought crosses your mind that flammability was a far greater immediate threat than slow poisoning. Gaslight accidents were common. Lamps tipped, curtains caught, nightshirts ignited. Women's nightgowns, designed with long, flowing sleeves and sweeping hems, turned into conflagrations in seconds. Mainstream fire records from London in 1878 note dozens of fatalities caused by apparel catching flame near a bedside candle. That knowledge clings to you like a guilty secret, making you hold your breath each time you pull back the canopy for fresh air. If you're wealthy, you might have a fire-retardant woolen blanket or asbestos mat laid beneath your gowns, an odd comfort against the roaring dangers of open flames. Fringe tip: some experimental arsenic pottery incorporated small doses of red lead to slow combustion, an unintended side effect of trying to outdo the competition. Quirky, perhaps, but still lethal if you breathed in the resulting fumes. You tuck your legs in, mindful of how the hem of the nightshirt flutters with every breath, like a pale ghost waiting to catch a spark. In less affluent homes, the channel of danger shifted from dyes to open hearths. People threatening arson with night lamps exchanged them for tallow candles, coated in lard, which smelled horrible but burned more safely. It's a grim trade-off. You'd rather smell like a butcher's bin than risk your nightwear catching fire and dragging you screaming through the flames. A sudden creak from the foot of the bed jerks you upright, your nightshirt trailing over the edge like an echo. You freeze, remembering last night's seance, how someone claimed they saw a figure in white drifting just beyond the gaslight's reach. You glance at the canopy's underside, half expecting a translucent shape. Nothing. Just shadows and the shifting contour of the mattress. Your pulse pounds, another benefit of arsenic exposure, no doubt. Though tonight you blame the cold draft that snakes beneath the door. You reach out for your woolen shawl and drape it over your chest. Warmth spreads, chasing away the chill, but the knowledge of your garment's hidden hazards still lingers. You think back to the chemist's shop you passed earlier today, the bright labels promising everlasting green or brightest blue, all without warning of potential toxicity. He smiled at you, polishing a glass vial, and you recall his jovial voice assuring customers that accidents were quite rare. For him. For the washers and seamstresses breathing in arsenic dust day in and day out, the toll was heavy. Chronic exposure led to skin lesions, stomach pains, and, in tragic cases, sudden collapses. Despite this, the craze for vivid dyes only intensified after 1862, when Parisian fashion declared those hues the pinnacle of elegance. It became a perverse badge of honor. My clothes may kill me, but at least I sparkle. Even children wore luminous gowns for nighttime parlor games, bright enough to glow faintly under low gaslight, because why let safety ruin a good spectacle? You drape the shawl tighter, smoothing the linens beneath your back. The sewn seams feel reassuring now, as if each stitch holds you together against society's relentless vanity. Somewhere in the house, a grandfather clock chimes once, 1 a.m., you realize. Already, your segmented sleep schedule has merged into a groggy haze. You consider removing the nightshirt and sleeping nude, common among aristocrats who even then feared fabric dangers, but you shiver at the thought. Nudity might protect you from dyes but expose you to drafts and supernatural mischief. Some believed skin-to-air contact could invite spirits to detect vulnerable flesh. Historians still argue whether nudity was ritualistic or purely practical. So you stay covered, cycle through discomfort, and accept that every textile in your wardrobe is a double-edged sword. You close your eyes, trying to focus on breathing instead of chemical nightmares. Your shawl feels warm, safe, though you wonder how many previous occupants of this room succumbed to arsenic-laced bedding. As sleepiness threatens to pull you under, you recall an old rhyme your nurse taught you. Green as grass is not your friend, nor blue that glimmers to the end. Trust the white and plain of night, for simple cloth will ghosts not bite. You'd thought it absurd then, but now, nodding into darkness, it feels oddly comforting, a lullaby and a warning rolled into one. You hug the shawl close, bury your face in the pillow, and whisper a promise to stick to plain fabrics in the future. Outside, the gaslight outside flickers, casting a final glow beneath the door. No bursts of flame, no ghostly silhouettes. Tonight, you survived the most fashionable threats of the era. You sink into the haze of half-sleep, safe in plain linen, if not entirely safe from the lingering ghosts of every emerald garment ever worn. And now you drift. You wake up with a cottony fuzz on your tongue, halfway between blissful drowsiness and a full-on pharmaceutical voyage. You realize you've just sipped your nightly nerve drops and nightcap, two elixirs that Victorians considered essential for drifting into dreamland. The nerve drops were doctor-prescribed cocktails of laudanum, chloral hydrate, and sometimes even chloroform, all mixed in a sweet syrup to disguise that medicinal tang. Mainstream physicians touted these tonics as a cure for nervous disorders and insomnia, and by mid-Victorian times, laudanum was so common you could buy a bottle at the local apothecary without raising an eyebrow. You raise your glass again, just a sip, because you've learned that too much of a good thing can send you on an accidental voyage to unconsciousness well before bed. Your lips fumble around the rim, swollen slightly from repeated contact with that potent opium solution. It's a numbing, soothing sensation. Your tongue tingles as if it's been lectured on the virtues of compliance. You swallow and immediately feel a slow warmth trickle through your throat, like molasses greasing a rusty hinge. Most nights, you'd never think twice about ingesting a drug stronger than some modern anesthetics, but here you are, in 19th century comfort, trusting your sleep to a tincture derived from poppies. You might even be considered unusual if you didn't take your nightly dose. Some estimates suggest up to 30% of urban middle-class households administered laudanum to children suffering from teething or colic. A spoonful of opium, they believed, soothed both baby and worried mother. Historians still argue whether this indulgence was more medicinal necessity or simple recreational habit, but by candlelight, it all feels like a gentle promise of oblivion. Beyond laudanum, there were nerve sachets stitched into pillows, herbal pouches filled with lavender, hops, and sometimes powdered valerian root. Fringe paraphernalia included dream pillows embroidered with cryptic symbols, intended to draw in pleasant visions or repel nightmares. You can almost feel the flicker of electricity when you press your cheek against the fabric, imagining it whispering secrets from the land of Nod. Some enthusiasts even tucked a thread of cat whiskers inside, convinced the animal's nocturnal prowess would transfer into one's own dreamscape. You snort quietly, pillow talk taken to a witchy level. Your head spins slightly as you swing your legs over the edge of the bed. The nerve drops have begun to bloom their haze across your mind. You stagger toward the washstand for a final rinse of your face, blinking into a cracked glass mirror. The reflection is sleepy, eyes heavy, cheeks flushed. You splash cold water and gasp at the shock, feeling alive, or at least less like a somnambulistic jellyfish. Traditional nightcaps were the next step in the ritual. Not the alcoholic kind. Though some preferred a nip of brandy, these were cloth caps meant to keep one's head warm, maintain coiffure, and absorb midnight sweat. You reach for yours, a soft knitted cap trimmed with lace, and tug it over your hair. The fabric snugs around your skull, pressing against your temples in a strangely comforting hug. Without electricity to regulate indoor heat, your head would grow clammy or icy, depending on the season. Temperature control was overachieved by doctors' orders and underwhelmed by your wool cap. In some circles, you might have sported a plaster of Paris brain mold nightcap, an absurdly rigid contraption claiming to shape your skull toward moral uprightness as you slept. It was marketed by a charlatan who insisted that forehead bumps and indentations revealed character flaws. You imagine waking up with a skull-shaped dent in your linen, a permanent souvenir of Victorian pseudoscience. And the rumors? Oh, the rumors! Fringe apothecaries whispered of a silence cap, lined with powdered mandrake root, that silenced snorers by gently constricting the jaw. It supposedly prevented nocturnal snorts, but you're skeptical. You picture someone snoring into a mandrake mouthpiece, dreaming of Yoda while gasping for air. Yet, nostalgia for safety knows no bounds, and some wealthy eccentrics bragged about these caps at dinner parties, delighting guests with vivid accounts of muffled snores and midnight puppy-like whimpers. As you stand there in your nightcap, you think of how doctors wagged their fingers about the dangers of these practices, warnings in musty medical journals about laudanum dependency and overdoses. Yet, society embraced them, trusting that the next generation of chemists might concoct something safer. It never quite happened. You rinse your mouth one more time, reluctant to swallow any leftover laudanum poisoning your future memories of sleep. You peer into the wash basin's porcelain depths, wondering if your pupils look as dilated as they feel. You catch a glimpse of that embroidered dream pillow on the chair, its lavender sachet crackling faintly. Maybe tonight you'll dream of fields of fragrant flowers instead of the rattling of chamber pots and the hiss of gas lights. You shuffle back to bed, cap in place, and ease yourself beneath the blankets. Your tongue, now delightfully numb, feels like a marshmallow courtesy of your bedtime brew. You close your eyes, letting the nerve drops dance through your neurons in lazy spirals. You feel a comforting heaviness, as though you're sinking into a plush cloud gown. You recall your doctor's solemn warning, "Too much opium and you'll never wake properly," delivered with the same gravity as a preacher forewarning hellfire. You shrug. Tomorrow is a problem for tomorrow you. Tonight, you welcome the fog. Through the window, you hear distant hooves clattering on cobblestone, a lullaby of urban life that fades into a slurred echo inside your skull. The candle beside the bed gutters and stabilizes, its flame blue-tinged where it meets that last drop of wax. The nerve sachet in the pillow sighs, ready to release its herbal perfume. You drift, caught in the gentle slipstream of chemical slumber, where dreams are vivid and numbing in equal measure. The nightcap dims your head, the nerve drops sink your mind, and you are artfully guided into that sweet, pharmacological oblivion. And as you slip beneath the edge of consciousness, you're not entirely sure if you'll remember this ritual tomorrow morning, or if you'll even want to. You blink twice and rub your eyelids, only to realize they're a little too wide open, uncomfortably dry from the scratchy gaslight. Tonight's final ritual awaits. Good night, Mr. Belladonna. You reach over to the nightstand where a dainty glass vial of belladonna eye drops sits beside a small porcelain dish of face cream. The label reads, "For brighter eyes and smoother skin." You twist off the cap, wary but curious. Belladonna, you remind yourself, is deadly nightshade. A mainstream eye remedy in the Victorian era, it dilated pupils to create that sought-after, luminous gaze, perfect for late evening parlor appearances. The active tropane alkaloids, atropine and scopolamine, were prized for their cosmetic effect. You squeeze a drop into each eye, feeling a cool burn that swiftly gives way to a widening blur. Your pupils grow, bathing the dim room in your personal halo. You look at your partner sleeping across the bed. Wait, there is no partner. Just the patterned wallpaper watching you develop an otherworldly stare. As your vision softens, you scoop a dab of face cream, laced, as rumor has it, with arsenic and mercury, to smooth fine lines. It's scented with rose water and a hint of lavender, but that's just lip service. Beneath the floral fragrance lies a subtle metallic tang. You massage it into your cheeks, neck, and forehead in delicate circles, whispering unconsciously, "Sleep tight." The cream is marketed as a reviving night mask, promising to banish wrinkles overnight. In reality, chronic use led to skin sloughing, tremors, and worse. Historians still argue whether these beauty elixirs were truly marketed with safety disclaimers or if manufacturers knowingly hid their dangers in rose-scented jars. You pause and catch your reflection in the darkened vanity mirror. The candle's flicker catches the metallic flecks in your cream, making you look as though you've been sprinkled with stardust or rust. You let out a tired chuckle. Stardust or slow arsenic suicide, potato, Pete. A joke for one, but the irony isn't lost on you. Vanity was a luxury worth risking a little or a lot. Rinsing your hands, you admire the lingering shimmer on your skin. You press a fingertip to your lower lash line, spreading a trace more eye concoction, hoping your tomorrow morning portrait will boast the coveted midnight sparkle. In salons, gentlemen used belladonna to heighten their flirtatious glances. Ladies employed it to appear perpetually fresh after long carriage rides. Quirky fringe practitioners even added crushed beetle carapaces to creams, believing the carmine pigment enhanced complexion, and insects, of course, had mystical properties. You hide a grin at the insane creativity of it all. You lie back and let the cream settle, listening to your heartbeat pulse in tandem with the candle's wavering flame. Your blurred vision transforms the chamber into a soft impressionist painting. Bedposts melt into shadows, The canopy drapes flow like gentle waves. It's almost comforting, this distortion of reality. You wonder if artists of the aesthetic movement borrowed from these nightly visions for their dreamy canvases. But you're not here to become a muse, you're here to sleep. You reach for your dream sachet, plucking it from beneath the pillow. It's a tiny linen pouch stuffed with crushed roses, hops, and a pinch of powdered belladonna leaf, just enough to lend a subtle sedative boost through your pillow's surface. The scent swirls around your nose, floral and slightly pungent, like standing in an overgrown English garden at dusk. You inhale deeply. Botanical aromatherapy, some enthused Victorians called it. Others swore the sachets attracted actual fairies. Historians still argue whether these purses were an apothecary's invention or a folkloric holdover from rural midwifery traditions. Your vision spins gently and you giggle at the absurdity. At this rate, even the fairies will need eye drops. You settle into your pillow fortress, 3 pillows deep, 1 contoured for the neck, 1 bolstered for the knees, 1 smoothed under your elbow for reading. The newspaper piece you abandon lies face down. Surely the belladonna dreams will make your headlines seem less tragic. Out of the corner of your eye, you see the faint outline of a small porcelain box marked cold cream. A teeny Victorian face mask often made from beeswax, rosewater, and lead carbonate, a toxic miracle for whitening skin. You're tempted, but you decide that tonight's dose of eye drops and arsenic cream is enough. You've flirted with toxins already. Your eyelids, now heavy with the weight of exhausted nerves and diluted atropine, start to droop. The wall's floral pattern seems to pulse in time with your slow breathing. The creak of a floorboard downstairs reminds you that you're not the only insomniac in this neighborhood. Other windows, long since dark, might also glow with clandestine beauty rituals. You think of how modern dermatology scoffs at these sleepy-time cosmetics, lead and arsenic long-band, atropine eye drops regulated. But back then, these concoctions were sold at apothecary counters with a perfumed flourish, no prescription required. A curious blend of science and snake oil. You tighten your grip on the rumpled coverlet and murmur, "Guess we're all lab rats in a beauty experiment." A gentle warmth seeps into your cheeks, and your vision warps into a soft blur of bisque and ivory. You hear a faint creaking of your door, probably the house settling, or maybe someone checking if you are still properly asleep. You imagine them peeking in, seeing your face shimmering under candlelight like a moonlit lake. They'll nod solemnly, thinking, "She takes her beauty seriously." Sleep drifts in like a patient friend, cushioning your thoughts in dull velvet. Your final sensations are a delicate tingling behind your eyes and the faint lingering of rose-scented arsenic. You wonder, sleepily, if you'll dream of someone massaging mercury paste into your skin or a phantom stylist smoothing your hair with lye. Maybe you'll dream of the peddlers on Oxford Street peddling these jars of poison. Either way, tomorrow's reflection will reveal what you've wrought. Your last coherent thought, before the cream's chemicals and the belladonna's blur claim you, is a half-whispered pun. "If beauty's pain, let me remain in dreams." You fold yourself into the pillows, drifting off with the savage luxury of a Victorian beauty queen. You wake in an uneasy half-dream, your foot brushing against the cold floorboards, and you realize you never adjusted the bed's orientation tonight. In Victorian superstition, the direction of your head mattered almost as much as your nightcap. Aligning your bed north-south with your head to the north was believed to invite evil spirits to slide right down your spine, so you should sleep east-west, head towards sunrise, to keep the devil from crawling in at your feet. You roll over, knees knocking against the iron bed frame, and decide it's time to perform the old compass ritual once more. Outside your window, the moonlight glints off cobblestones, painting the bedroom walls in pearly stripes. You slip from the bed, shivering in your plain linen nightshirt, the one your grandmother approved. Tiptoeing to the footlocker at the end of the bed, you retrieve a small brass compass, its glass face foggy with age. The needle quivers like a trapped insect before settling to point toward magnetic north. You hold your breath, remembering your grandfather's warning, never trust the Mercator map, only the compass cares for your soul. Historians still argue whether these compass rituals were grounded in genuine navigation concerns or simply an excuse to clutch an heirloom in the dark. You crane your neck, angling the compass so the red tip aligns with the north marker. Then you trace a mental map of the bedroom. Window here, door there, dresser to the left. Your nightstand is slightly askew from last night's seance rattling. Adjusting the bedposts requires muscle and delicacy, two things you're short on when half awake. You push with your shoulder, grumbling as the springs squeal, the wood whining in protest. The mattress shifts beneath the frame, lopsided for a moment, but you manage to nudge the headboard a few inches toward the east. Crisis averted. Back in bed, you lie diagonally as usual, because no matter how careful you are, the mattress sags and you must angle yourself for comfort. The compass sits on your pillow, nestled among the lace edges, a silent guardian watching your dreams. You inhale, exhale, and feel a flicker of relief. You've done your bit to keep hell's minions at bay. Victorians took these rituals seriously. A popular guidebook from 1865 insisted that misaligned beds could lead to nightmares, night terrors, or even possession by restless specters. People tested their theories by sleeping in different directions and recording their sleep quality in dream journals, sometimes drawing eerie maps of dreamscapes resembling upside-down bedrooms. Fringe practitioners recommended carving devil traps into the floorboards beneath the mattress, small circular patterns etched into wood that would ensnare malevolent spirits like flies in honey. You don't have the time or the tool for that tonight, so the compass will have to do. As you nestle into the quilt, you recall the last seance, when the medium invited a spirit to stand at the northern foot of the bed. You tensed up so badly, your nightshirt shifted, revealing an inch of ankle, a scandalous exposure in daylight but downright dangerous in occult terms. The medium declared that spirits avoid direct alignment with the east, where Christ's resurrection lighted the world, so the trick was to corner them in the shadows. You shrug at the memory, pulling the quilt up to your chin. Vive la science, you think. Behind your eyelids, the wallpaper's vine motif seems to reach toward the compass, creeping up the bedpost like curious fingers. You shift again, mindful that any sudden movement might throw off your orientation. Bed alignment wasn't just about directions, it was about stillness, vigilant calm. Some people carried miniature sundials to bed, set beside their bedside water glasses, to calibrate the compass at dawn. Historians still argue whether these dials were practical instruments or fashionable desk ornaments that added mystique to a nightly routine. In wealthier homes, they went further. Bed canopies were embroidered with celestial stars and zodiac signs, weaving protective astrological charts above the sleeper's head. Under them, velvet pillows bore cryptic sigils designed to deflect nightmares, another layer of defense against malefic forces. You imagine how decadent that must look, a star-speckled canopy hovering like a velvet sky, embroidered with gold thread that caught candlelight. For you, the plain linen canopy you rigged with spare drapery tacks will have to suffice. Your breathing slows as you stare at the compass's tiny needle barely moving under the pillow. You wonder, is it really guiding you away from the devil, or merely a piece of metal responding to Earth's magnetism? You remind yourself that everyday objects become imbued with meaning at night. That's part of the charm. The line between science and superstition blurs when candles gutter and shadows stretch. Beneath you, the mattress creaks as you settle your spine into its new position. You feel the pull of gravity differently, almost like you're lying on a slight incline. It's disorienting at first, but your body remembers this dance. Every Victorian mattress was uneven, flattened in spots by generations of sleepers, an organic topography that dictated countless midnight adjustments. A distant church bell tolls 2 a.m., each chime a reminder that the night still holds hours to go. You focus on each toll, counting them, letting their resonance sink you deeper into a meditative half-sleep. At the 12th bong, you imagine the bell's vibrations rippling through the compass, affirming your bed's correct alignment. Good enough, you decide. You turn your head to glance at the covered mirror on the opposite wall. Supposedly, mirrors could reflect spirit energy back to its source, preventing hauntings, but leaving them uncovered might trap the living in some spectral loop. You're satisfied with today's compromise. Mirror draped, compass set, canopy loosely tied for draft control. Between these talismans and your plain nightshirt, you feel as fortified as a Victorian gentleman in his morning frock coat. Then your thoughts drift to the next section of tonight's bedtime ritual, sealing the room, locking the door, imagining ghost traps in the sill. But that, dear sleeper, is tomorrow's story. For now, you close your eyes and let your mind settle into the gentle lull of compass-guided dreams. If a spirit tries to slither in from the north, it will find only a beam of moonlight and a firmly angled bed rail barring its way. Your final conscious thought twists into a wry smile. Even the devil hates an eastbound mattress. And with that, you drift, trusting in your simple metal guardian and the promise of sunrise. You blink awake to the soft scrape of your slippers sliding across polished parlor floorboards. Tonight's ritual isn't confined to the bedroom. You're summoned downstairs for a private seance in the drawing room. But first, socks. Victorian night socks weren't mere foot warmers. They were talismans. You wiggle your toes into a pair of knitted wool hose embroidered with tiny crescent moons, a fringe custom among spiritualists who believed lunar symbols tuned your body to the spirit world. Historians still argue whether these socks were truly conducive to paranormal energy or just an excuse to knit fancy footwear during idle hours. You wrap a shawl over your shoulders and descend the creaking staircase, each step echoing like an invitation to something half-hypnotic. The drawing room door is ajar, gaslight flickering against heavy drapes. Inside, half a dozen candlelit figures sit in a semicircle around a small oak table, its surface bare except for a single white crystal and a black feather. You choose your seat carefully. No one wants to sit next to the rattler in the corner who insists on wearing a mourning veil throughout the seance. The medium, a gaunt woman dressed entirely in black lace, extends her gloved hand to welcome you. You note her rings, each set with a different psychic stone, from amethyst to onyx, claimed to amplify clairvoyance. Quirky, perhaps, but she insists each gem holds the echo of departed souls. You shrug inwardly. Your socks seem to hum with anticipation. At least you'll have warm feet. Once everyone is seated, the medium dims the lamps. Candle flames gutter, shadows stretch and yawn across the walls. "We invite the spirits to join us," she intones, voice like velvet scraped over glass. You place one hand palm up on the table, her instruction, feeling the grain of oak and the residual warmth of a previous sitter. You close your eyes while your breathing slow, deep. They tell you breath is the bridge between worlds. Historically, table rapping, a series of knocks and taps, was the seance signature phenomenon. In mainstream Victorian society, such manifestations were attributed to the recently deceased attempting communication. By the 1870s, spirit rapping had become so commonplace that newspapers treated it like a new form of shorthand. One rap for yes, two for no. Tonight, you're half expecting a Morse code from beyond. The first few minutes are quiet, save for the whispered prayers of the priestess of curiosities. Then, your heart flutters. The table shakes lightly. You glance at your neighbors. One woman gasps, another squeezes her husband's hand so tight his knuckles blanch. You squeeze your socks-clad feet together under the table, wondering if your lunar embroidery is actually causing this. After a moment, you feign a yawn, slumping slightly. There's something deliciously subversive about attending a seance under the pretense of being half asleep. "I'm just so tired," you murmur, eyes fluttering open only enough to see the candlelight. The medium scolds softly, "Stay present, if you wish for true communion." You nod, attempting a serene posture, though in truth you're just trying to keep your head from bobbing forward. The tapping resumes, 3 raps by the crystal, then a series of hesitant scratches by the feather. Every participant, including you, is supposed to transcribe these knocks. But honestly, you're more fascinated by the flicker of your neighbor's veranda socks, striped silk hosiery considered scandalously bold for the occasion. You stifle a grin. Spirituality, it seems, is also a fashion show. As the seance continues, you recall that scholarly debate. Were these knocks genuine spectral signals, or the product of unconscious muscle movements, what modern observers call the ideomotor effect? Historians still argue whether the most enthusiastic mediums consciously fooled themselves before fooling the audience. You shift in your chair, feeling your embroidered socks slip against the polished floor, and wonder if that sound counts as evidence. Suddenly, The black feather leaps off the table and flutters to the carpet, no apparent wind. You sit up straight, socks sliding on wood, as if drawn by magnetic force. The spirit grows restless. The medium murmurs, her veil rustling. A cold draft snakes around the table, though all windows have been sealed. You glance down. Your sock's moon motifs seem to glow faintly in the lamplight. You'd laugh if you had any breath left. A hush falls. The medium closes her eyes, chants something in a language you don't recognize, and then invites anyone with a question to speak. You clear your throat. Is there anyone here who wishes to speak to us? You ask in a conspiratorial whisper, partly because you want to hear a phantom reply, and partly so someone else will hide your embarrassed socks under the table if they're truly glowing. For a moment, nothing. Then tap, tap, pause, tap. 3 distinct knocks. You jolt. The candle flames dance wildly, as though startled by an unseen attendee. Your mind races. Should you believe? Or chalk it up to someone's hidden foot nudging the table leg? You glance around. Faces are lit with rapture, fear, disbelief. You dare to hope it's real. But then the seance takes an odd turn. The medium announces the spirit's need for physical rest and invites the group to lie down on the floor, emulating the corpse posture to appeal to the departed. You raise an eyebrow. Floor naps? It's a fringe ritual you read about. Some insisted that mimicking death's posture made communication smoother. Some modern occultists still debate whether corpse pose, shavasana, has any psychological benefit or if it's merely theatrical. Historians still argue whether these corpse posture seances were widespread or confined to a few eccentric circles. You exchange glances with the rattler in the corner, who nods fervently. You shrug and nod back. Why not? You lower yourself onto the oriental rug, smoothing your socks over its intricate weave. The wool pits under your knees, and you feel shockingly comfortable. The medium begins a soft cadence, calling the spirit into the circle of sleeping silhouettes. Candlelight bounces off the ceiling, and you find yourself blinking sleepily, caught between genuine curiosity and the urge to doze. Lying there, you recall the many rumors of seances gone awry, objects flying, tables levitating, walls rattling with unseen hands. One particularly bizarre anecdote told of a spirit so persistent it followed a family home, tapping on bedroom walls at all hours and scaring the household cats into madness. You imagine your socks providing a barrier. No ghost foot shall cross these boundaries. Your breathing steadies, the medium's chant lulls you toward dreamlike trance, and soon you drift, questioning whether the taps you hear are from spirits or the house settling. Either way, it's oddly pacifying. And it's never dull, waiting for the walls to speak. Eventually, the medium calls the seance to a close. You rise, stiff and delighted by the unexpected sprawl. You collect your notebook, still blank, and slip your socks back into slippers. Everyone thanks the medium in solemn whispers. As you slip back up the stairs, you catch the echo of faint tapping on the parlor walls. An encore, perhaps. You pause at the top step, listening. Could be the cat. You don't have a cat. Back in your bedroom, you hang your shawl and remove the lunar socks, folding them neatly on your nightstand. You pat them, half grateful for their warmth, half wary of their mystical reputation. Then you slide back under the covers, recalling the seance hush, the candlelight omens, the curious feeling of spirits brushing past. As your head sinks into the pillow, you think, socks and scents, my feet have never felt so otherworldly. You chuckle quietly, then close your eyes, letting the night's uncanny energy settle into your dreams. You awaken with a flop. Something tiny and exasperating has crawled across your cheek. You jerk upright, heart hammering, and flick the offending creature into the candlelight. A bedbug, its carapace glinting like a minuscule mahogany shield, scuttles away. You stifle a groan. Of all the horrors Victorians faced at night, poison nightgowns, wandering spirits, explosive gas lamps, nothing ranks quite as low as an army of bloodthirsty insects feasting on your sleeping flesh. If you live in a wealthier household, servants take turns fumigating the chamber with tobacco smoke or sulfur fires, but in working-class quarters, you're on your own. You reach for the chamber pot, dump its contents into the hearth downstairs. That's one way to disinfect the room, though the smell is akin to a butcher's shop on market day. You tiptoe back, blanket gaping, and squat beside the bed with a kettle of boiled water you hauled earlier, scooping it into a shallow pan. You pour the steaming water along every seam of the mattress and the cracks of the wooden frame, scalding any reluctant bedbugs into oblivion. The hiss of hot water on aged wood echoes like a battle trumpet in the stillness. Most Victorians of modest means relied on such scald and scamp tactics. It was cheap, effective, if tedious, and better than doing nothing. Historians still argue whether repeated boilings actually solved the infestation or merely drove the bugs deeper into the walls, but desperate times called for desperate measures. You scrub the frame with a rag dipped in vinegar and salt, a recipe passed down from your grandmother, who claimed it would repel not just insects but also wandering souls. You snort, handy, since your last ghost encounter almost had you locking yourself in the wardrobe. If you're particularly resourceful, you might lay talcum powder or diatomaceous earth, a chalky dust that dehydrates insects, along the floorboards. Fringe enthusiasts suggest infusing the powder with ground pennyroyal or lavender oil, because aromatic powders confuse the beastie's senses, they say. You once tried lavender, and all you got was a room scented like a funeral parlor. Still, the bedbugs seemed less enthusiastic about biting you, which you choose to credit to the herbs rather than the colder nights. Some of your neighbors swear by a more theatrical solution, releasing a dozen cats into the bedroom. Cats supposedly pounced on larvae and nymphs, keeping the cadre of bloodsuckers in check. You don't have a cat, remember? But the image of kittens tumbling over one another atop your sheets does have a certain appeal. It's a fringe cure, though, and historians still argue whether the felines genuinely helped or merely became additional sources of fur and flea infestation. After you've scalded, scrubbed, and dusted, it's time for a more drastic ritual, the mattress shake. You haul the mattress outside, assuming it's not too late or too cold, and fling it repeatedly against the fence. Each thud is a small victory against unseen foes. You count the blows, 20, 30, 40. By the end, your shoulders ache, your nightshirt is damp with sweat, and the neighbors might think you're auditioning for a smithy's apprenticeship. Still, seeing the bugs tumble free, or so you hope, makes it worthwhile. When you drag the mattress back in, it's crisp and echoing hollow, like a drum. You drape the blankets over a chair to air out. The feathers in your pillows are likely infected, but replacing them is a luxury you can ill afford. Instead, you re-fluff, hoping the gusts will shake loose the last stragglers. Before you sink back into bed, you sprinkle a ring of fine ash around the mattress legs, an old wives' charm to trap insects crossing the line. Older still is the superstition that demons travel in straight lines, so a circular barrier would confuse any dark forces. You smirk at the overlap. Your insect defense and ghost defense are one and the same. You settle down, bracing for another assault. Your skin tingles in anticipation. Then you realize, your socks. You still have those moon-embroidered socks from last night's seance draped over the chair. You tug them on, reasoning that if lunar symbols can ward off spirits, maybe they can keep little red-brown vampires at bay. You wiggle your toes. The wool is scratchy but oddly reassuring. The candle guttering on the nightstand catches the tip of your gaze. You think back to last week's newspaper article. London hospitals reported a sharp rise in bedbug-related anemia among the poor, and public health officials even considered mandating periodic fumigation of tenements. But funding never materialized, so you and your neighbors remain the frontline soldiers in this checkered skirmish. You breathe deeply, letting the cold draft circulate, because fresh air might kill bugs as effectively as steam, doctors said. Or it might give you consumption. Historians still argue whether open window policies were more harmful to health than helpful against infestations. Either way, you crack the sash a few inches, letting a bitter breeze snatch at the corners of your blanket. Tonight you're determined. You press your ear to the mattress, listening for the skitter of legs. The silence is almost deafening. You glance at the blankets on the chair. They look intimidatingly thick, like fortress walls. A final touch. You pin a sachet of mugwort and wormwood beneath your pillow, herbs said to repel insects, spirits, and bad dreams all at once. You whisper, "Guard me well," tucking the pouch under the pillowcase. You climb in, socks warming between covers, and pull the quilt up to your chin. Your skin prickles with residual adrenaline. Every muscle aches from the mattress-flinging workout, but determination fuels you. You close your eyes, imagining the bedbugs scuttling away in panic, stung by vinegar, daunted by ash, and startled by lunar socks. The hush of night returns. The candles glow steadies. You focus on the steady rhythm of your breathing, trusting that the combined rituals, scalding, powdering, shaking, and moon magic have finally pacified the infestation. Your last thought, as sleep begins to cloak you, is a wry mantra. No bugs, no bites, no bloody curses. Tonight I sleep unblessedly undisturbed. And with that, you drift into a bug-free dreamscape, one where the only crawling things are your own dreams, creeping softly through your mind. You wake in the liminal space before dawn, the gray light of morning seeping through your curtains and igniting your restless thoughts. It's that peculiar hour when the wealthy count their sleepless hours like precious coins, while the poorer folk are too exhausted to even notice, or too shattered to stay awake. You lie there, wide-eyed, feeling the divide beneath the sheets. In aristocratic circles, insomnia had become something of a status symbol. You're not truly elite unless you've tossed and turned through at least 3 consecutive nights, proclaiming grave ponderings about politics or art as the cause. Mainstream medical journals of the 1870s reported that up to 20% of upper-class patients complained of chronic sleeplessness, blamed on overactive intellects, endless social obligations, or the moral weight of empire. Historians still argue whether this was genuine pathology or simply fashionable suffering, a way to demonstrate that life's burdens were too great for ordinary slumber. You remember Lady Pembroke at last week's salon, yawning dramatically as she described her creative insomnia, claiming she composed an entire sonnet at 2 a.m. You flash back to her satin nightcap glowing under gaslight. She probably laced it with the same nerve drops you tried. You smirk. If insomnia is art, then nursing a hangover is performance art. But at least these privileged insomniacs have physicians on call, silk sheets, and the luxury to lament their condition. Meanwhile, in the lower tiers of society, sleeplessness had no romance. For the working poor, nights were often punctuated by hunger pangs, cramped peas of shared beds, or the racket of factory whistles in nearby streets. Reports from charitable infirmaries noted that laborers returning from 12-hour shifts got as little as 3 hours of fragmented sleep, if that, due to overcrowded tenements and the constant glow of street gas lamps. No doctor to prescribe laudanum or ivory bedpans for them. Their insomnia was acute, brutal, and rarely discussed in polite company. You shift under your own quilt, drawing a parallel between the two extremes. You're not sure which is sadder, the bored-rich muscling through existential crises or the weary poor gasping for any rest at all. You tuck one knee under the other, recalling the tales of women standing in the nursery at 4 a.m., quietly rocking cradle after cradle, tears in their eyes as their infants wailed. They couldn't afford a night nurse or a chamber pot in every room. They just dealt with it. In wealthier households, insomnia treatments ranged from the genteel to the absurd. You once read about a duchess who insisted on nightly seances with a hypnotist to coax sleep from her mind, while her butler doled out doses of bromide salts to steady her nerves. Bromides became all the rage, sold openly as sleep salts, though chronic use led to a condition known as bromism, which caused skin eruptions and cognitive dulling. Historians still argue whether bromide therapy was a genuine breakthrough or an overhyped panacea pushed by pharmaceutical entrepreneurs. You consider your own makeshift remedies: chamomile tea, a handful of crushed valerian root slipped under your pillow, and rhythmic counting of barnyard animals: 1 goose, 2 cows, 3 pigs, until even the livestock in your mind feel drowsy. Sometimes you recite the same nursery rhyme you heard as a child. Now I lay me down to sleep. Pray the Lord my soul to keep. But the final line, if I should die before I wake, feels like a challenge at 3 a.m., not a lullaby. Occasionally, you venture out onto the balcony for what doctors called a sleep promenade. Draped in a shawl, you stand in the dewy air, absorbing the silence, hoping the scent of damp stone and distant bonfires will lull your senses. Some believed that night walks regulated circulation and soothed frazzled nerves. Fringe enthusiasts even carried pocketfuls of crushed mint leaves to inhale whenever their heartbeats quickened. Critics said it did no more than raise eyebrows. Supporters swore by its miracle. All the while, life below continues in muffled rhythms. Carriage wheels rattling, dogs barking, the faint clatter of market stalls awakening for the day. You wonder how many of those noises keep you awake versus how many existed solely in your fatigued imagination. After all, when you're sleep-deprived, every whisper sounds like a portent. You settle back onto the pillow, eyes fixed on the ceiling's ornate medallion. Back when this house was built, its first owner reportedly slept just fine, probably thanks to no gaslight, no industrial racket, and certainly no nightly self-examinations of moral turpitude. You imagine him slumbering like a log, snoring in harmony with his snorer spouse, unbothered by the world's weight. Yet, social pressure drove the upper classes to pride themselves on nocturnal finesse. You recall the scandalous diaries of a certain viscountess, who chronicled her pleasure at reading forbidden novels under candlelight, even as her husband slept soundly beside her. The thrill of secrecy became intertwined with the thrill of wakefulness, a curious cocktail that made both insomnia and illicit romance more intoxicating. In contrast, laborers returning from mills collapsed onto straw mattresses, their chests heaving with the day's dust. Some whispered that repeated overwork leading to sleep deprivation was a kind of slow death, a fate worse than any ghostly visitation. Others argued that the poor developed a hearty tolerance, sleeping fitfully but deeply whenever chance allowed. Historians still argue whether the working classes borrowed their resilience from rural ancestors or simply adapted out of sheer necessity. You picture the genteel sufferer of insomnia sipping your nerve drops, checking the time on a silver watch, lamenting every passing minute. And beside them, a seamstress stirring in the thin hours, her fingers itching to darning needle-stubborn tears in someone else's garments. Both are awake. Both are captive to the night. You rise on one elbow and rub your tired eyes. The thin morning light intensifies the room's dust motes, each glimmer like a tiny, accusing eye. You think about the coming day, appointments, chores, duties. The wealthy will lament their exhaustion in drawing rooms. The poor will simply rise, bleary-eyed and determined, because there's no alternative. You close your eyes again, drawing your knees up in a fetal echo of both privilege and desperation. Sleep remains elusive, but you're not alone. Across the city, across the social spectrum, all manners of Victorians wrestle with the same enemy, the quiet insomnia that magnifies every creak, every doubt, every fear. And so, as dawn breaks, you resolve to chase sleep with new rituals, perhaps a chilled water compress, or a whisper of poppy seed oil on your temples. Or maybe you'll simply embrace the exhaustion, let your body crash when it must, and dream of a time when sleep wasn't a luxury or a burden, but a simple, unremarkable right. You draw one deep breath, willing the world's noise to fade. The final vestiges of nighttime rituals cling to your mind, nerve drops, nocturnal promenades, poetic insomnia, woven into the fabric of your restless soul. You settle into stillness and pray that whatever miracle you require to sleep finds you, whether you're wrapped in velvet sheets or flattened by factory fatigue. You wake again, not to the soft hiss of a draft or the creak of floorboards, but to the hollow rumble of your own stomach. It's the ungodly hour, somewhere between 2 and 3 a.m., and your mind has decided that now is the perfect time for a snack. You groan softly, peeling yourself out of the nest of blankets, clutching your nightshirt at the waist like a makeshift toga. You pad to the scullery cupboard, where a tin of digestive crackers sits beside a chipped porcelain mug. Digestive biscuits, you remind yourself, were invented in 1839 by two Scottish doctors aiming to soothe indigestion with a wafer-like treat made from wholemeal flour and alkaline salts. They were a legitimate medical recommendation, a mainstream remedy for uneasy stomachs after heavy dinners of roast beef and suet pudding. Historians still argue whether their mildly sweet flavor was ever meant to be more than a clever marketing ploy by the founding bakery, but by Victorian times, everyone, from nurses to navvies, was nibbling them between meals or at midnight. You twist open the tin, the metal lip protesting with a high-pitched squeal that makes you wince. The scent of wheaty grains and a faint tang of bicarbonate drifts out. You pop one cracker into your mouth, the dry texture cracking under your teeth, and chew thoughtfully. It's oddly comforting, like eating a slice of history with just enough grit to remind you of why you needed it in the first place. You pour a slug of tepid water into your mug, there's no fresh milk at this hour, and take a deliberate sip. It sloshes against the chipped rim, a polite hiss that echoes in the narrow hallway. You lean against the wall, nibbling another cracker, and listen to the house settle. Somewhere beneath the floorboards, mice skitter in their nightly forage. You hear the faint patter of little paws, a rapid tap-tap-tap that could be Morse code from the rodent realm. In wealthier homes, servants would clamp iron traps baited with cheese or bits of bacon to catch the nuisance vermin, while the working poor improvised by stacking bricks under floorboards and tying catnip-scented rags at the entrances. Fringe folklore suggested that if you sprinkled powdered cloves or crushed peppermint leaves at entry points, the pungent aroma would repel mice just as effectively as traps, though you suspect the mint merely made your kitchen smell like a dentist's office. You smirk, thinking, at least the rodents have fresh breath. You nibble another cracker as your eyes adjust to the scullery's dim lantern glow. The walls are lined with rows of earthenware crocks and jars of pickled onions, their brine jelly-like under the low light. Spotting your reflection in a grease-streaked window, you check for crumbs on your nightshirt. No good crawling back into bed looking like a midnight scavenger. Victorians were keen on maintaining decorum, even in the throes of nocturnal snacking. Never be seen eating messily, your mother once scolded you. One cracker at a time with dignity. You stare down at the tin, debating whether a third cracker is too many. After all, doctors warned against late-night feasts, claiming that the stomach needed rest or else it would rebel with nightmares or, even worse, bilious seizures. Mainstream medical texts of 1865 admonished against indiscriminate nocturnal eating, yet here you are, defiantly crunching away. You take a thumb-sized piece of cracker, dunk it in the water to soften it, an unconventional technique frowned upon by purists, and let it dissolve slowly, a bizarre porridge of crumbs and stale biscuit. Your mind wanders to the mouse problem. Last week, you woke to a squeak so loud you swore it was someone tapping a penny against the wall. You threw on your wool shawl and chased the noise across the room, waving a candle until the rodent dashed into its hiding place. You considered leaving a trail of cracker crumbs as bait, but the memory of that crumb dough you made on Sunday cautionarily reminds you, bait might lure them in, but also your cat, if you ever have one. You don't have a cat. Settling back with your half-dunked cracker, you glance at the door leading to the pantry. It's sealed at the bottom with a wooden doorstop, your own modification after reading a fringe pamphlet that claimed a pan of vinegar placed near pantry entrances would create an acidic barrier no mouse could cross. You tried it once. The vinegar puddled under the door and smelled like a pickle bottling plant for days. You resolved to just seal the gap with clumsy wedging next time. Balancing the cracker on your fingertip, you recall that upside-down cheese traps, made by suspending a scrap of cheese under a bucket, were all the rage among inventive middle-class families. You never tried it yourself, fearing it would just trap a helpless mouse until you remembered to release it. Mercy programs for rodents didn't exist, so most of the time, trapped mice met a grim fate at dawn. You wonder if any soul-sensitive Victorians ever offered a prayer for them. After all, they prayed for everything else. Crunch. Another cracker goes down. You pat your belly, half satisfied, half worried that the salt might keep you awake, which, in turn, might make you reach for the third tin of digestive biscuits stashed behind the tea caddy. You resist. Tonight, one tin is enough. You wipe your mouth with the corner of your nightshirt, noticing the faint pattern of darning where you stitched a small hole last month. It's a minor domestic triumph, an act of thrift and care. Your grandmother would have been proud. She also would have insisted that every stitch be made by lamplight in daylight hours only, lest your eyes fail come morning. You snicker, thinking of her admonitions about overworking the eyes and inviting wind sickness into the head. Finally sated, you place the cracker tin back on its shelf, sliding it behind a jar of pickled walnuts so it's not too tempting. You blow out the lantern with a single, firm puff. The scullery goes dark. You stand in silence for a moment, convinced you hear the echo of one final mouse squeak, perhaps disappointed, perhaps triumphant. You pad back to your room, gingerly stepping over the threshold so as not to disturb the new floor leveling you attempted last week. The hall feels colder now, and you pull your shawl tighter around your shoulders, a callback to last night's seance warmth. You smile. At least your socks were useful for warmth and spiritual energy. Tonight, they're just wool. Versatility is underrated. Back in bed, you tuck your legs in and feel the cracker crumbs tickle your throat with a final reminder. Midnight snacks can solve hunger but might stir indigestion. You press a hand to your stomach, smoothing away phantom gurgles, and whisper to yourself, digestive was never just a biscuit, it's a nightly truce between body and brain. You draw one deep breath, forgiving yourself for this solitary feast. The room hushes, and the floorboards cease their midnight symphony of rodent rehearsals. You close your eyes, letting the stale sweetness of the cracker linger on your tongue as you drift toward sleep. Sleep soundly, unless, of course, the mice decide to throw a midnight feast of their own. You wake to the faint sensation of your back pressing against an ancient quilt of murmurs and mysteries, your mattress. It's lumpy beneath you, each ridge a breadcrumb of its long history. You shift, and the springs groan in protest, like an old man creaking in his favorite chair. Tonight, you're not just lying on straw or feathers. You're nesting in layers of Victorian thrift and superstition. Beneath the pristine linen cover lies a patchwork of materials. In grand homes, mattresses were stuffed with goose feathers, luxuriously soft, if you didn't mind the occasional sharp quill tip jab. Fact is, from the early 1800s, feathers were prized for insulating warmth and breathability, prized enough that entire crates of live birds were plucked each season for overnight comfort. In humbler dwellings, horsehair, straw, and even recycled clothing scraps made up the bulk, a true rag-and-bone approach to bedding. Historians still argue whether common reuse of hair and textile was driven by pure economy or by some odd sense of frugality as moral virtue. You press your palm into a conspicuously firm bump. It feels like compressed hair, human or animal, you can't be sure. Rumor had it that some households even included hair from the recently deceased, believing that familiar fibers would keep a departed loved one close through the night. You shiver, recalling your grandmother's admonition, don't poke too deep, there could be a stray lock of Aunt Petunia's hair buried in there. Quirky, yes, but Victorian families did treasure deathbed mementos, sometimes a strand of hair woven into lockets, so why not a mattress? The scent that greets you is a curious blend of must and nostalgia, old linen, faint musk of horsehair, and a hint of lavender from last week's fumigation. You inhale, filling your lungs with the bouquet of centuries. Bedbugs, you remember, are no respecter of stuffing. Once they colonize, they burrow through straw, feathers, and horsehair alike. In some grim accounts, families moved mattresses outside for days of sun bleaching and smoke treatments in hopes of banishing the vermin. Historians still argue whether daylight fumigation really eradicated infestations or merely drove them deeper into floorboards. Tonight, you're armed with ash, vinegar, and moon socks, but even your arsenal seems inadequate against what lurks beneath you. You roll onto your side, testing another uneven patch. A sudden jolt of discomfort could be a trapped tick, a hardened lump of unwashed wool, or perhaps the ghost of a waking spirit tied to discarded scraps. It's said that mattresses absorb emotional residues, the anguish of a sick child, the fevered dreams of a consumptive mother, the panic of a fire escape. Fringe antiquarians swear that aged mattresses sometimes whisper when you press your ear to them, faint crackles like voices just out of comprehension. You adjust your pillow, a bolster of down that size under your neck, and try to ignore those legends. The truth is, goose feather mattresses were often poorly sterilized, and the down clumps could grow mold if not aired regularly. Your great-aunt's housekeeper once fell ill from inhaling spores trapped in a feather mattress, sending the family into a panic of nightly airing and linen boiling. You count yourself lucky your feathers were only lightly steamed during laundry, not scalded to oblivion. Lumpy or not, these mattresses shaped more than sleep, they shaped dreams. In a bizarre fringe ritual, some Victorians placed a sliver of birch bark or a pin between sheets, hoping the nightly discomfort would produce vivid prophetic dreams. Others believed that sleeping on uneven surfaces stimulated the soul's journey into other realms, granting visions of past lives or future fortunes. You recall the pamphlet you read, "Uneven beds are the workshop of the subconscious." Historians still argue how widespread these practices actually were, but enough people swore by them that quirkiness became an overnight trend in mystical circles. You sink into a hollow where the mattress has worn down, aligning your spine with a natural vertebral cradle. This groove might be years old, formed by generations of sleepers favoring one side. In grand estates, mattresses were flipped weekly, an arduous task for the butler and footmen, so indentation was less common. In your modest lodging, weekly flipping is a whimsical memory. Instead, you shimmy to one corner each night, letting gravity sculpt your sleep surface. As you lie still, you feel the mattress shift beneath you with the slightest change in weight. It's alive in its own way, responding to every sigh, every exhalation. The springs creak softly, a lullaby of metal and dust. You recall that some daring souls installed hidden bells on their bed frames to detect ghostly movements at night, a sort of supernatural alarm system. You haven't heard a bell yet, but you wouldn't bet against it being rigged by an inventive mind. The texture under your cheek is clumpy, possible a stray tuft of goose down pressed into a hardened ball. You roll your head gently, willing yourself not to think about the pointy quills that sometimes poked through worn coverings. Early winter nights made feather stuffing particularly unkind. The cold-lined feathers would clump into icy knots, sending micropins into your ribs. Wealthy Victorians countered this by adding sheep's wool as a buffer layer. You consider borrowing that idea, though the prospect of sheep hair against your face doesn't sound much softer than goose quills. Your thoughts drift to mattresses of the working class, where straw and horsehair dominated. Straw gave a pleasant rustic scent when fresh, but within weeks, it turned sour and brittle. Horsehair, often taken from carriage horses, resisted moisture but clung to hidden mites ready to pounce at night. Servants would shake out hair stuffing each spring, tossing it onto the roof to be scorched away. Some families even burned straw during feast nights in midwinter, a communal bed-cleansing ceremony meant to purge both pests and bad luck. Historians still argue whether these burn-clean rituals had any actual hygienic benefit or were purely symbolic fire festivals. You wriggle again, finding a more stable spot. The mattress dips in one corner, an invitation to dream or a trap for restless legs. You push down, feeling the wood beneath the padding, reminding you of the cheaply made laths supporting the whole structure. In inexpensive beds, the laths were thin, sprung too far apart, causing mattresses to sag alarmingly. You once tried stuffing folded cloth under a sag as a quick fix, resulting in a strange mattress within a mattress that left you feeling as though you were sleeping on a cloud poorly supported by a hammock. Tonight's uneven landscape has its benefits. The valleys cradle your body, preventing you from rolling off in your sleep. The peaks prompt small muscle adjustments that keep circulation from stagnating, a sort of built-in mattress physiotherapy. You chuckle softly. Who needs a back rub when a lumpy bed does the job? Your eyelids grow heavy as you settle into your accustomed hollow. The creak of springs and the whisper of down beneath the linen lull you. The mattress's past life presses softly against your form, a quilt of experiences folded into every tuft. You half wonder if the very fabric retains memories, if the goose feathers recall the laughter of children, or the straw the sighs of exhausted laborers. You draw one final breath, imagining the mattress as a living being, a patchwork animal your body rides each night. Maybe that's why it feels haunted, not by ghosts, but by the echoes of every dream dreamt upon it. Whatever haunts this bed, it serves as a vessel for your own nocturnal voyage, a rich tapestry of comfort and discomfort entwined. With a sigh, you let the uneven surface guide you towards slumber, embracing each lump and tuft as a sign you are part of a grand, if somewhat itchy, Victorian lineage. Tonight, you sleep upon history itself, one groan of spring at a time. You blink against the flicker of candlelight and realize it's long past curfew, if such a thing existed, yet here you are, still awake. Tonight's final pre-sleep ritual, extinguishing candles with reverence to avoid curses. In Victorian England, people believed that blowing out a single candle without uttering a protective phrase could summon misfortune. The mainstream etiquette manual the English housemaid insisted on saying, "lights out," peace be about before dousing the flame. Historians still argue whether this verbal formula was genuinely widespread or later Victorian revivals retrofitted it into household lore. You reach for the slender beeswax tapers on your bedside sconce. Their soft glow has been your companion through the night's anxieties, from ghost traps to bedbug warfare. You draw in a breath, let your shoulders slacken, and recite in a hushed tone, "Lights out, peace be about." The flame shivers as if acknowledging your words. Then you bring 2 fingers close to the wick and pinch it just so. With a gentle squeeze, the candle goes dark, leaving only a smudge of smoke curling upward like a sigh. The air feels charged, as though the ritual locked away not just light but the lingering specter of fear. In grander houses, extinguishers used a candle snuffer, a small bell-shaped tool of brass or silver, to smother flames cleanly. It was considered bad luck to blow candles out directly, because one might inadvertently scatter sparks that carried stray messages from the spirit realm. Fringe practitioners even fashioned snuffers with engraved runes intended to trap evil in the smoke. You don't have such embellishments tonight, so your fingers must do the work. You smirk at the slight sting of hot wax on your fingertips, an occupational hazard of Victorian nighttime labor. Once the candle is dead, you press both palms over the sconce, as some advised, to welcome back any stray good spirits that might have left with the light. It's a quaint gesture, perhaps more psychological than magical, but there's a comfort in believing you're sealing in safety. You imagine little benevolent imps nestling in the shadows, ready to whisper lullabies in your dreams. With the last light banished, the room settles into velvety blackness. You pause to let your eyes adjust, aware of every object now hidden: the covered mirror, the draped canopy, the iron key resting on your nightstand. All your defenses stand guard in the dark. You lie back in bed and press the key to your lips, offering an unspoken thanks for another night survived. Outside, the night is quieter, only the distant call of a lone night watchman and the rustle of leaves in the garden. You think of those watchmen, whose rounds began around candle snuffing time, armed with rattles and lanterns, ready to alarm the town if fire broke out. Their presence reassured citizens that the night, though dark, was still governed by order. Historians still argue whether these watches truly prevented disasters or simply offered a false sense of security to an anxious populace. Your heartbeat slows as you nestle into the mattress's familiar grooves. The blackness is surprisingly soothing, a soft invitation to surrender to unconsciousness. You reflect on how, in modern times, we simply flick a switch and the room goes dark. No ritual, no protective phrase, no mingling of smoke and memory. Part of you envies that simplicity. Another part clings to the ceremony, cherishing these moments of deliberate closure. You feel for the thick wool blanket at your feet, a late addition to your nightly layering. Then trace a finger along the cool iron rail of your bed. You imagine the rail glowing under moonlight, a silent sentinel holding you safe. The old house creaks ever so softly, as though answers your unspoken wish for quiet. Now, with the flame stilled and the room submerged in ink, you let your eyelids drift shut. You murmur a final promise to yourself, no prayer left unsaid, no spirit left wandering. Your pulse eases into a steady lull, guided by the ancient syncopation of candle snuffs and whispered charms. Here, in total darkness, you finally release the day's regrets, unspoken apologies, unfulfilled ambitions, tiny panics, and let the night wind carry them away. You breathe in the hush, welcoming the oblivion of sleep like an old friend. You wake in that half-lit, half-dream state, your fingers already reaching for the leather-bound journal beside your pillow. The room smells faintly of lavender sachets and scorched beeswax, both remnants of last night's beauty potions and candle-snuffing rites. You crack the spine, hearing that satisfying snap of fresh paper, and dip your quill in a tiny inkwell of sepia-tinted ink. This is your dream journal, your nightly confessional, your ticket to decoding the mysteries swirling behind your eyelids. Dream journals surged in popularity during the Victorian era, especially among middle and upper-class households. Mainstream psychologists, well, as mainstream as Victorian sensibilities allowed, praised the practice as a window into the subconscious, a way to unearth hidden anxieties or moral failings. You press the nib to the page and begin. I dreamed I was chased by a swarm of moths, their wings like tattered lace brushing against my ankles, each flap carrying a whisper of forbidden gossip. The words flow in uneven loops, like you're tracing the margins of your own mind. You glance at last night's entry, with its frantic scrawl about floating coffins and silver-eyed dogs. You sigh. Some nights your dreams are so ridiculous, you half believe your supper of pickled herring is staging a revenge plot. Victorians believed that recording dreams could prevent diabolical possession, keep nightmares at bay, and even predict the future. In the 1880s, popular magazines ran serialized columns where readers submitted their own dream excerpts, hoping for public interpretation. Historians still argue whether these columns reflected genuine curiosity about the mind or were mere sensationalism to boost subscription numbers. Either way, people devoured them like morning tea and gossip. You tilt the journal toward the candlelight, careful not to smudge the ink. Your fingers smell of lavender oil from the sachet tucked beneath the pillow, just enough aroma to coax pleasant visions, or at least mask the stench of last night's bedbug fumigation. You scribble a quick margin note, investigate moth symbolism, good omen or midwife's curse. You bite your lip, remembering the obscure pamphlet that claimed dream moths heralded the imminent arrival of a sick child. You blink. You're neither pregnant nor a midwife, but the suggestion still gives you pause. Beside the quill, you keep a small stack of scrap parchment covered in diagrams, circles, stars, and those odd little runic symbols meant to attract lucid visitors to your sleeping mind. French dreamers insisted these sigils channeled etheric energies and invited prophetic visions. Some even painted them directly onto bedroom walls in faint chalk outlines. You tried once, only to find the scratching sound of chalk against plaster kept you awake. Now the symbols live on paper, safe and silent. As you write, the ink soaks into the grain of the page, and you swear the script itself feels warmed by your palm. It's intimate, watching each letter form like a fingerprint of your nocturnal self. You recall the medical treatise you skimmed last week, cautioning that too much introspection might exacerbate nervous hysteria. Historians still argue whether dream analysis in Victorian psychiatry advanced mental health or merely medicalized normal sleep phenomena. You shrug. Tonight, you embrace both the science and the superstition. Your quill pauses. You consider whether to add a dab of rosemary oil to the ink for its memory-enhancing properties. Some herbalists claimed that rosemary tincture improved dream recall and warded off nightmares, an herbal fringe cure that smelled disturbingly like a funeral bouquet. You decide against it. Mixing oil into ink would gum up the nib, and you lack the patience to clean it before dawn. Instead, you sketch a quick map of the dreamscape, a winding river, a solitary oak, and that bizarre castle made of broken china. Dream maps were a popular parlor amusement. Families would compare theirs over tea, debating every detail. You once attended a salon where a spirited debate erupted over whether falling in a dream signified real danger or merely a failing of moral fortitude. Historians still argue if dream maps were genuine psychological tools or just polite conversation pieces. You remember sipping your tea, too nervous to speak up, while the hostess praised her husband's dream interpretation as brilliantly Freudian. Freudian? The man died 30 years before Freud even sketched his theories. Such is Victorian exaggeration. You lean back, eyes half-lidded, and tap the quill gently on your lip. The jet of candlelight flickers, casting dancing shapes on the wall, roving shadows that could be your imagined dream critters come to haunt the room. You shiver, recalling how some dream journals included pressed flowers from the night before, believed to anchor pleasant visions. You don't have fresh blooms, just a dried chamomile blossom still clinging to its yellow petals. You press it between two pages at the back, a talisman for sweet dreams. Below the pressed blossom, you've written a little charm. Lotus, bloom and set me free, grant a restful soul to me. Cheesy? Maybe. Effective? Who's to say? Dreams are personal after all. You heard of one eccentric lady who recited that charm aloud each morning while pouring cold water over her face, convinced it would banish nightly phantoms. You tried once and nearly fell back into bed, drenched and protesting. Night air seeps through the window crack, cool on your cheek. You fan the pages of the journal, hoping to dry the ink faster. Behind your eyelids, the images from last night's dream flicker, moths, the river, that echoing castle corridor. You feel the lingering uncertainty. Are these signs of something profound, a hidden message from your soul, or just the result of too many nervous drop tonics and midnight pickles? Your entry concludes with a flourish, a tiny moon symbol next to the date, marking this as your second sleep reflection. You whisper, "One day, someone will read these words and think me prophetic or mad." You grin. It's the perfect Victorian dilemma. You close the journal gently, tuck the quill back into its leather sheath, and slide the book beneath the pillow. Legends say that sleeping atop your dream journal locks in revelations for the next night, an odd layering of self-fulfilling prophecy. Historians still argue whether such rituals were widespread or confined to the more mystical end of society. You're content to be both scholar and believer, scholar and loon, in equal measure. Drawing the coverlet up to your chin, you inhale the mingled scents of lavender, ink, and beeswax smoke. The room hums with the hush of midnight secrets. The journal's weight against your head is oddly comforting, a reminder that your dreams are anchored in reality even as they drift beyond logic. Your final thought before surrendering to the edge of sleep is a wink at your own audacity. May my dreams reveal truths, or at least amusing fodder for the morrow. With that, you let your eyelids close fully, paper-thin borders dissolving between waking and dreaming, ready to collect tomorrow's nocturnal musings. You wake to a strange stillness, a silence heavier than the usual night hush, and realize you're not alone in the next room. You slip from your bed and pad down the hallway, guided by the soft glow of a single oil lamp. The door to your sister's chamber stands ajar, revealing her small frame curled beneath a quilt, and beside her, wrapped in the same blankets, lies her twin brother, who passed away just this afternoon. It's a chilling sight, but in your world, it's considered comforting rather than macabre. Victorian families sometimes laid out recently deceased children in the same bed as their living siblings, believing the warmth and familiarity would ease the transition for both. In some rural areas, children slept alongside adopted night corpses for days until the undertaker arrived, an emotionally intimate ritual that seems unthinkably eerie today, yet served a very practical purpose in times before modern mortuaries and refrigeration. You step closer, taking in the delicate features of the child who's just slipped beyond life's threshold. The faint blush of cold cheek, the perfect stillness of lashes against a pale face. Your sister reaches over in her sleep, her small hand brushing her brother's cold shoulder. You hold your breath, torn between horror and empathy, but you remind yourself that grief needed space in every corner of the house. Mainstream etiquette guides even address the practice, noting that carefully supervised co-sleeping with the deceased could help younger children accept death's reality rather than be frightened by a sudden absence. You kneel on the rug, careful not to wake your sister, and gently press your cheek to her forehead in a silent goodnight kiss. The ritual, known as the kissing goodnight, was believed to impart comfort and a final blessing to the departed soul, sealing familial bonds beyond the grave. You taste the faint tang of candle smoke on your lips as you pull back, whispering a prayer under your breath. Historians still argue whether these intimate farewells alleviated mourning or risked prolonging trauma by blurring boundaries between life and death. In wealthier homes, children's corpses were sometimes dressed in miniature shrouds and arranged in separate beds outfitted with flowers and toys, allowing siblings to visit but not share the same bedding. Yet poorer families often lacked the space or resources for such separation, reinforcing the co-sleeping custom by necessity. You glance at the rough-hewn floorboards and threadbare rug and realize your family falls somewhere in between. You could afford the coach to town but not a mortuary's chill. The lamp flickers as a soft creak echoes from the far corner of the room. You look up to see the portrait of your grandmother hanging on the wall, her stern gaze softened by decades of cradle songs she once sang. You recall her firm advice: let the living embrace the dead in warmth, that nothing breaks the heart's continuity. There was comfort in continuity, she said, continuity of love that death could not sever. You wonder whether that continuity also allowed grief to linger like a stubborn whisper, refusing to fade. You rise and move to the small washstand, dipping a linen cloth into the basin for a quick hand rinse. Your reflection in the tarnished mirror shows wide, anxious eyes, but you compose yourself. After all, by tomorrow's light, the undertaker will come, and your brother's body will be removed for embalming and viewing by distant relatives. Tonight is the last night he belongs to you entirely. Returning to your sister's side, you smooth the quilt over both bodies, tucking it tightly under their chins. The familiar weight of the blankets, once a source of comfort in childhood fears, now carries a bittersweet lullaby of mortality. You gently stroke your sister's hair, murmuring, "Sleep well, both of you." The words feel inadequate but necessary, a ritual bridge between worlds. Stepping back into the waking room, you lower the lamp to its lowest wick setting, bathing the corridor in a muted glow. You touch the doorframe's edge, making the sign of the cross, even though your family's faith is more cultural than devout, to invoke divine safeguard for both the living and the dead. Fringe ministers sometimes recommended anointing doorposts with blessed oil to keep malevolent spirits at bay during these intimate co-sleeping rituals. Historians still argue whether such religious overtones were universally practiced or localized to certain denominations, but you find solace in any form of ritual protection. As you slip back under your own covers, the weight of the night presses gently on your chest. You clutch your own quilt, the patch seems cool against your skin, and think of the duality of sleep tonight: rest for the living, transition for the dead. The candle in your room gutters, casting the walls into dancing chiaroscuro, as if the shadows themselves are paying silent tribute to the departed child. Your breathing slows, and you focus on the rhythmic hush of two hearts, one in quiet repose, one forced into deep, eternal stillness. You remind yourself that tomorrow, grief will dawn with the sun, and life's routines will resume amid tears and sympathetic nods. But for now, the bond endures in this tender, if haunting, co-sleep. You close your eyes, imagining your brother's spirit cradled in the warmth of family love, pursuing dreams beyond mortal bounds. Your last conscious whisper is a soft benediction: "Good night, little one, may your rest be peaceful." Then you drift, the line between sleep and sorrow blurring into a gentle twilight of remembrance. You wake in a gray half-light, the dawn struggling to breach your curtains yet failing spectacularly, exactly how you like it. Those heavy brocade drapes you pulled across the windows hours ago are working perfectly, stifling the sun's first rays and muting the city's stirrings into a soft, insular hush. The fabric is thick, velvet-backed damask, lined with horsehair interlining to block drafts and noise, and it hangs like a silent sentinel around your slumbering sanctuary. Heavy curtains weren't merely decorative in Victorian homes. They were vital for privacy, insulation, and even health. In mainstream building guides of the era, authors recommended hung portieres of dense material to retain hearth warmth and shield occupants from the pernicious influences of street miasmas. You run a hand along the scalloped edge, feeling the weight of every stitch, a testament to a time before double glazing or electric light. Yet, these curtains do more than guard against cold and dust. As you lie back into your pillows, you sense their psychological heft pressing in on your mind. There's a comforting pressure, like being gently hugged by the walls themselves. The room feels womb-like, separated from the world's worries. Carriage wheels clattering, factory whistles screaming, even that neighbor's rooster crows suppressed into silence. In this cocoon of fabric, you can almost forget everything, except that you can't. Historians still argue whether blackout draperies were adopted for pure practicality or as a symbolic barrier between social turmoil and private repose. Some claim the rise of thick drapes coincided with urban unrest, Chartist protests, cholera scares, prompting households to fortify their interiors against external chaos. Others insist it was simply a fashion evolution, a shift toward darker, moodier color palettes in interior design. You suspect it was both, a practical fashion born of necessity, then finessed into a statement of genteel luxuriousness. You sit up, brushing stray hairs from your eyes, and glance around. The canopy above your bed is similarly cloaked in heavy velvet, the same deep burgundy as the curtains, trimmed with tassels that sway faintly when the wind tickles the drape's edges. This redundancy of fabric is reassuring. If a draft finds a way through the window, it'll be trapped by the canopy before it reaches your ribs. And if a curious spirit tries to peer in, it'll be met with an impenetrable fortress of cloth. Not that you expect ghostly traffic today. Your thoughts drift to some of the stranger fringe practices involving curtains. In certain occult circles, practitioners insisted one should wave a piece of silk in a circular motion before bed to energize the drapery like a spiritual battery. Alternatively, powdered baline symbols, tiny runic scribbles, were sewn into hems to ensnare nightmares before they slipped into the room. You once attempted this by stenciling a rudimentary crescent and star motif into your drape lining. It looked more like a toddler's doodle than an esoteric seal, yet you still swear last week's unsettling dream of crawling ivy was mitigated by your half-hearted handiwork. Back when these curtains were first installed, a traveling salesman extolled their virtues. Beyond this curtain lies peace. Within, no wind, no illness dare intrude. You imagine his ornate carriage parked outside, every inch of its windows curtained in matching textile, perhaps with a decorative fringe, all to showcase the latest in domestic defense. The idea caught on, not just in London townhouses but in seaside villas and industrialist estates alike. You might not own a seaside retreat, but your brocade knows no envy. Despite their benefits, heavy curtains had drawbacks. They harbored dust and trapped moisture, leading to mold growth if not aired properly. Some Victorians recommended a weekly ritual of sunning drapes, hauling them outside at midday, letting the sun and fresh air bleach and disinfect the fabric. This was tricky for many urban homes with tall, narrow windows and no courtyard. You once hoisted your curtain into the alley below, managing only half its length before surrendering to dizziness at the sight of the drop. The partial airing did little for mildew, but it made you dizzy enough to reconsider your bravery in other nocturnal pursuits. You stretch languidly, feeling the deep nap of the velvet against your fingertips. Its plush surface reminds you of the time you discovered a small tear near the hem and patched it using a scrap of an old hunting coat, mismatched in color but heavy in sentiment. Your uncle's garment had been sold off at a family auction, so reclaiming a fragment felt like retrieving a piece of history. The repair is visible only to those who know to look, another layer of personal narrative sewn into the drape's vast expanse. Thick curtains also shifted the acoustics of a room. With every footstep in the hallway silenced and the muffled toll of distant bells absorbed, you can better hear the gentle hiss of the fireplace or the soft swish of your own breath. This heightened awareness can be soothing or unsettling. Tonight, you lie back, eyes half closed, and let the hush fill you. Yet beneath that quiet resides a thin current of tension. Without external noise to distract you, your mind's own clamor takes center stage. You recall last month's salon gathering where a poet lamented, "My curtains cradle me in darkness, yet my thoughts blaze like torches." His audience nodded solemnly, a familiar paradox of luxury-induced insomnia. Historians still argue whether the proliferation of heavy drapery contributed to rising insomnia rates among the affluent, as their homes became eerily silent cocoons. Perhaps it's no coincidence that the same period saw exploding sales of hypnotic tonics and sedative sachets. Your eyelids grow heavy as you trace a finger along the carved wooden rod supporting these drapes. The rod itself is a work of art, brass finials in the shape of oak leaves, signifying strength and endurance. You imagine a blacksmith crafting these pieces by candlelight, unaware of their later use in rallying midnight armor against cold,
You draw the
light,
quilt tighter.
and noise. The drape's deep
Such
folds
attention to
pooling
detail
at your
is
feet
both charming
and let your
and
body
exhausting
sink into
to
the
contemplate.
In this fabric-lined fortress, you feel suspended between dream and wakefulness. The weight of the curtains, once a tangible barrier, now feels like a gentle reminder. The world outside may rage, but here you are held. One final thought flits through your mind. Tomorrow, when dawn arrives, you'll pull these curtains back and rejoin the world. But for now, their somber folds guard you, their muffled embrace a lullaby of shade and silence. You breathe deeply, letting the brocade's hush seep into your bones, and feel your racing thoughts slow to a steady whisper. The velvet walls close in around you, and at last, you surrender to sleep's gentle pull, cocooned in darkness yet comforted by the heavy thoughts these curtains both hide and harbor. You wake again, this time not to silence, but to something stranger, A gentle creaking above your head, followed by the distinct sound of a chair leg scraping ever so slightly. You don't startle. You've heard it before. That slow, mournful movement from the attic space above, where no one is supposed to be. You pull the covers a little closer, gaze up at the ceiling, and remind yourself, it's just the morning chair. The morning chair. A piece of furniture no one ever really sits in anymore. Not in the traditional sense. It's more symbol than seat. A narrow, high-back structure, upholstered in black crepe and tucked respectfully in the attic when not in ceremonial use. And even then, it wasn't brought down unless someone had died, or was about to. You remember the last time it appeared in the parlor. Aunt Marianne sat in it for 3 days straight, dressed in full morning weeds, barely speaking, sipping lukewarm tea while everyone avoided her gaze. Her husband had been trampled by a startled horse. No one mentioned the irony. He hated horses. You swing your legs over the side of the bed and listen again. The creaking has stopped. Still, the thought of that chair presses into your mind. It was once part of an entire suite of ritual furnishings, morning chairs, draped mirrors, black-bordered stationery, all essential to the Victorian death protocol. You could buy an entire morning set from a catalog, complete with embroidered napkins and a bell to signal visitors away. You tiptoe to your window and peer up toward the attic eaves. The thought of that chair just sitting there, waiting, has an almost superstitious gravity. Historians still argue whether these death-oriented objects were genuinely therapeutic or more performative, meant to reinforce a strict code of grief etiquette rather than offer actual solace. Some households even kept their morning chair in the main living room year-round, just in case. You can't help but wonder if that's why your aunt never quite stopped wearing black. Back when the morning chair was in vogue, etiquette guides dictated who could sit in it and for how long. Widows got the longest time, followed by eldest daughters, then close female friends. Men rarely sat in it at all. It was deemed unseemly for a man to mourn so publicly. Instead, they paced, smoked, and stared wistfully out of windows. You imagine yourself in that chair for a moment, wrapped in a wool shawl, surrounded by funeral lilies, sipping something bitter from a silver-rimmed cup. You wonder if anyone would approach you, or if they'd bow slightly and tiptoe away. You pull open your dresser drawer, hunting for your favorite shawl, the one with the small tear in the hem, and drape it over your shoulders. Not because you're mourning, just because, somehow, the presence of that empty chair above your head makes the room colder. It doesn't help that certain fringe groups believed the morning chair held spiritual energy from every person who'd sat in it to grieve. Soak seats, they were sometimes called, for their imagined ability to soak up sorrow like sponge into wood. Some believers even held seances from such chairs, convinced they enhanced spirit communication. That's probably why you've never sat in it yourself. Your great-grandmother swore she saw her deceased brother's reflection in the chairs would grain after her vigil. She claimed the knots in the wood shifted over the hours, rearranging to resemble his face. No one took her seriously, until the next person who used the chair reported the same thing. You shake the thought off and return to your bed, glancing at the ceiling once more. The house settles with a long sigh, and you tuck yourself back under the covers. The presence of the morning chair remains, a kind of quiet gravity hanging above the rafters. You think of all the people it supported, bone-weary mothers, heartbroken sisters, stoic aunts staring at nothing for hours on end. There's dignity in that sort of grief, you suppose. Structured sadness. Furniture as therapy. Mainstream Victorians took their mourning very seriously. Black clothing wasn't optional, it was law in certain households. Mourning periods were broken down into stages: deep mourning, half mourning, and finally, slight mourning, where lilac or gray might be allowed. Accessories mattered too: jet jewelry, crepe armbands, black-edged handkerchiefs. The morning chair fit into this hierarchy like a solemn punctuation mark. It wasn't just where you sat, it was what you signaled by sitting there. You remember reading that in some households, the chair had a small compartment beneath the seat, used for storing condolence cards, dried petals, or even snippets of the deceased's hair. You imagine lifting that seat now and finding a brittle lock of hair wrapped in a ribbon, maybe even labeled. It's strange what people choose to save. You suppose it made sense in an age before photography was common. People wanted something tangible to hold, even if it made others uncomfortable. And it did make people uncomfortable. You recall a family story, your cousin Edwin, who plopped into the morning chair during a summer visit, unaware of its significance. The entire room froze. Aunt Lavinia fainted. The chair, she later explained, was still heavy with sorrow, and Edwin's casual intrusion was practically an insult to the dead. No one let him forget it for years. He never came back. You shiver slightly, pulling the covers higher. Above your head, the silence is complete again. The chair is still. Or at least, pretending to be. Some say these old ritual objects take on a life of their own after enough use, like theater costumes never quite shedding the roles they've played. You suppose it's no stranger than a well-worn pew or a long-loved rocking chair, creaking under the weight of memories. You yawn and nestle deeper into your pillow. The thought of the chair isn't frightening, really. Just weighty, like a pause that stretches too long. Like a hush after bad news. You wonder if someday you'll be the one sitting there, shawl wrapped tightly, eyes distant, while others pass you cups of tea and avoid eye contact. Maybe, but not tonight. Tonight, the chair can rest. And so can you. The wind changes around 3:43 a.m. You know this not because you checked the clock, but because the scent in the room shifts. Just a little. A faint whiff of lavender. Dusty, dried lavender. Not fresh like a modern candle, but brittle, like the bundles that hung behind the parlor stove at your grandmother's house. You open one eye and sniff again. Yes, there it is. You reach toward the nightstand and fumble for the sachet. It's tucked just under your pillow, right where you left it, stuffed in a faded lace pouch embroidered with tiny violets and tied shut with a fraying purple ribbon. The sachet feels soft and cool in your hand, like handling a small beanbag filled with floral ghosts. You inhale again. Lavender, a hint of chamomile, and something slightly medicinal, perhaps valerian root. A very Victorian recipe, if you're honest. Victorians didn't just believe in floral scents, they lived by them. Especially at night. In an era before Vicks or Ambien, the well-to-do relied on herbal sachets and pomanders to lull themselves into sleep. Apothecaries sold dream pillows stitched with calming herbs, often labeled with delightfully theatrical names like Whispers of the Moor or Slumber's Embrace. You once found a recipe for one scrawled in the margins of an 1856 gardening manual: lavender, hops, rose petals, and dried lettuce leaves. Yes, lettuce. You're not sure it works, but you once included it in a mix for fun and had the strangest dream about a talking cabbage. Your sachet was a gift from a friend who claimed it had definitely seen a seance or two. That was part of the appeal, obviously. The Victorians didn't separate scent from the spiritual. The right smell could be a ward, a comfort, or an invitation. Some households even placed sachets on the windowsill to keep out evil spirits, or under pillows to entice prophetic dreams. You tried both. Results: inconclusive. Historians still argue whether the use of herbal sleep aids was more placebo than cure. The olfactory sense does have strong ties to memory and emotion, but how much lavender it takes to knock you out remains a matter of personal body chemistry and generous imagination. Either way, you're here for it. Better lavender than the old remedy involving warm vinegar and crushed snails. As you lie back again, your eyes trace the cracks in the plaster overhead. They snake gently across the ceiling, like a roadmap for drowsiness. The lavender works slowly. You feel your breath start to match the room's rhythm. Slow in, slow out. Maybe there's valerian in this sachet after all. It has that slightly peppery bitterness that makes your brain hum like a quiet cello string. In one of your more chaotic historical side quests, you learned about dream chairs designed with built-in sachet holders. Yes, actual furniture with little drawers or cushions pre-filled with soporific herbs. You wonder why that trend didn't catch on. Imagine sitting in a chair that literally breathes lavender at you. Peak comfort. Less convenient for naps, though, if the seat was mostly herbs. Your own bed now smells faintly like an antique cupboard that once held tea leaves, old books, and the ghosts of conversations. You let that idea linger. The Victorians loved the notion of spirit scent, the belief that spirits left behind a trace aroma, usually roses for benevolent visitors and sulfur for the less desirable kind. You suppose that made sleeping complicated? Was that rose you smelled, or just grandma's sachet? There's something cozy about falling asleep surrounded by smell. Unlike sight or sound, scent wraps you from the inside. It's subtle, sneaky. 1 minute you're inhaling, the next you're dreaming of fields, fog, or that time you walked through a market in Lisbon and someone sold you 6 varieties of dried mint you never used. In the quiet, you hear the crinkle of the sachet as you adjust your pillow. The soft sound reminds you of bedtime routines long since past. In certain Victorian households, the sachet wasn't just placed under a pillow but pressed into a warmed brick or baked stone, letting the scent diffuse slowly as the bed cooled through the night. You could try that, but you're fairly sure your heating pad is an antique safe. Still, the principle stands: scent equals sleep. Sometimes. If you believe. And tonight you believe just enough. Your thoughts drift again, past lavender and chamomile, toward a stranger detail: the night drawer. Not a nightstand drawer, but a drawer, often in a dresser or writing desk, that held sachets meant only to be opened after dark. Perfumed letters, tiny bottles of floral oil, pressed petals in wax paper. Not for data. Too indulgent. Too sleepy. You love the idea, sleep having its own secret drawer. A place for softness, comfort, and the quiet promise that no matter how loud the world gets, you can always open this little drawer and shut it all out. You might start your own drawer, you think. You've got enough oddities collected: dried orange peel, rose soap you never used, a vial of bergamot oil that smells like a haunted afternoon tea. Just enough to give your future self a scented nudge when everything feels too sharp, too awake. You sigh, letting the lavender pull you deeper. Your limbs grow heavy, your thoughts a little hazy around the edges. You picture a Victorian child being tucked in by candlelight, a sachet stitched into the corner of the pillowcase, a parent whispering "good night" in that hushed, oddly formal way they had back then. You wonder if those children knew how lucky they were. Probably not. But then again, they didn't have electricity or internet, so maybe it all evens out. The sachet shifts as you roll onto your side. Its scent is softer now, warmer somehow. Your last conscious thought before drifting is of fields, not the manicured kind, but wild, wind-brushed meadows where herbs grow in clumps and bees weave drowsy spells around them. You walk there for a while in your mind, bare feet in the cool grass, arms swinging gently at your sides. Then nothing. Just lavender, darkness, and the promise of sleep. The silence stretches like a velvet ribbon. You shift under the blankets and open your eyes just enough to register the faint flicker of movement across the wall, a sliver of moonlight filtered through the lace curtain. It dances slightly, as if something unseen passed near the window. Not a person, just the breeze. You decide it's the breeze. Your fingers brush something on the nightstand, a cool, oval shape, smooth and oddly reassuring. You know what it is before you even look. A mourning brooch. Another Victorian relic that somehow made its way into your collection of bedtime curiosities. A glossy, dark oval of jet or gutta percha, its surface cold and polished, set with a tiny curl of hair under glass. Someone's actual hair, probably cut from a loved one long gone. You can't tell if it's blonde or brown. It's aged into a faded umber, like tea-soaked parchment. You pick it up and tilt it toward the moonlight. The hair curl is still intact, coiled like a question mark. These brooches were meant to be worn close to the heart. Literally. Usually pinned just over the left breast during mourning periods. The physical weight of memory, of absence. Some were intricately braided, others contained entire miniature portraits painted on ivory. Yours is simple, modest, almost shy. You imagine someone a century ago clasping it to their dress with trembling hands, maybe on the first day of official mourning. A day where everything changes, including your wardrobe. Especially your wardrobe. Victorian mourning jewelry wasn't just sentimental, it was status. Displaying grief meant following codes that were as much fashion as they were emotional etiquette. Jet, in particular, became the gemstone of sorrow. Its fossilized wood, you remember, which feels poetically appropriate, wood petrified by time, polished by grief. Queen Victoria herself made it fashionable after Prince Albert's death in 1861. She wore mourning for 40 years. 40. Imagine never being allowed to wear cheerful colors again. Not even once for a laugh. Historians still argue whether Victoria's endless mourning was a personal expression of grief or a calculated image of piety and permanence. Either way, it caught on. Jet mines in Whitby flourished. Craftsmen made everything from rings to lockets, earrings to cufflinks, all in black, all for grief. But you're more intrigued by the hair. It's a strange thing, isn't it? Cutting a lock of someone's hair and saving it, not out of vanity, but as a totem, a relic, something you can touch when memory gets slippery. Hair doesn't decompose easily. It outlasts skin, bone, and reason. That's part of why it was used. A piece of permanence in a world that lost people far too often. Childbirth, consumption, industrial accidents, life was fragile. Hair was something to cling to. There were entire businesses built around hairwork. Artisans who'd take your lock of hair and transform it into woven floral wreaths, bracelet chains, or brooches like the one you're holding now. Some people even took classes in it. Victorian Pinterest, really. You imagine women gathered around parlor tables, weaving human hair into loops and bows while sipping tea and discussing the neighbor's questionable wallpaper. Your own brooch came from an antique store with questionable lighting and a clerk who insisted it's real and it's English, probably post-1860. They said it like a spell. You liked the shape. You liked the idea of holding history in your palm. And now here it is, whispering silently to you in the quiet hours of the night. You wonder who the hair belonged to. A mother? A lover? A child? You'll never know. But that doesn't stop your mind from sketching a figure. Maybe a young woman in a high-necked dress, eyes red-rimmed but dry, holding this very brooch with a measured tenderness, just before pinning it on and walking into a room full of people pretending not to stare. Some mourning brooches were double-sided. One compartment for hair, another for ashes, or a pressed flower. Yours has just the hair, but the back is engraved, lightly, almost too faded to read. You squint and make out the initials EC, or maybe GC. It's hard to tell. Letters have a way of slipping over time. You set the brooch down gently, as if not to wake it. It's fascinating how grief once demanded so many physical tokens. Mourning wasn't quiet or invisible, it was wearable, smellable, tangible. If you weren't visibly suffering, were you really suffering at all? That was the Victorian vibe. You wore your heartbreak like armor. And your jewelry? That was your flag. Of course, not everyone approved. Certain writers of the time, more cynical ones, mocked the jewelry as melodrama. Grief turned into fashion statement. They complained about the lachrymose parade of black lace and hair curls. One critic called it grief made glittering, which honestly sounds like a pretty good band name. Still, the trend persisted. Even into the early 20th century. And it wasn't limited to women. Men wore mourning rings, cufflinks, cravat pins. Your great-uncle reportedly had a tie pin made from his sister's braid. A little creepy? Maybe, but maybe not. Grief does strange things to people. And back then, strange was normal. The brooch glints softly as you shift in bed. You imagine tucking it into a drawer and forgetting it, only to find it again years later, not remembering where it came from. That's the way with old objects. They drift out of their own stories and into yours. Some fringe believers thought mourning jewelry held energy. Not just memory, but actual emotional residue. That wearing a brooch like this could connect you to the departed, or to the one who wore it before. A psychic breadcrumb. You've never felt anything supernatural from this one, but it does carry a certain hush. Like it's listening. You roll onto your side, facing the window, the brooch still resting near your hand. In the moonlight, it looks less like jewelry and more like an eye. Watching, remembering, mourning even now, in the quiet hours when all the world seems paused. You close your fingers lightly over it, not out of fear, but companionship. You don't know who mourned with this, but somehow, tonight, you do it with them. Just a little. Just enough. The air is still again. The lace curtain stirs slightly, brushing the sill like a whisper. You feel your breath slow, your body gently unwind. The past has strange ways of folding into the present, especially when it's shaped like a curl of hair, sealed in glass, waiting on a nightstand. And so, you sleep, one hand beside a century-old sorrow, wrapped in its quiet dignity. You wake slowly, like a boat drifting back into the dock of awareness. The room is quiet, so that velvety silence again, like all the walls are padded with sleep. You stretch one arm, then the other, and your fingers graze fabric. Not the modern weave of cotton or polyester, but something stiffer, coarser. A folded piece of linen. You forgot it was there. You draw it closer and unfold it gently. A nightcap. White, ruffled, and slightly ridiculous looking. You hold it up like Hamlet holding the skull, examining its frilled edges and slightly yellowed stitching. It's handmade, maybe hand-washed 1,000 times, soft around the edges where the starch gave up long ago. Now, you're not wearing a nightcap, you have boundaries. But you keep it close for nights like this, when sleep and history feel like two hands cupping your head. The Victorians, of course, loved nightcaps. Not just the drink kind, though we'll get to that, but the headgear variety. Soft, practical, and supposedly essential for anyone with a shred of nighttime dignity. Nightcaps were worn by both men and women, though with key differences. Men's caps were pointed, sometimes absurdly so, little fabric cones like sleepy dunce hats. Women's were often frilled and tied under the chin, as though one might be swept away by a midnight gust and needed the extra security. They weren't just for warmth, though that mattered, especially in the icebox bedrooms of 19th century England. Victorian homes weren't exactly energy efficient. A roaring fire in the parlor didn't mean your upstairs room wasn't a meat locker. A proper nightcap kept the heat in and, more importantly, the drafts out. Historians still argue whether nightcaps were a purely functional garment or a continuation of social modesty into sleep. After all, a head covering was part of daytime fashion for many women. Why not keep it on at night, even in bed, when modesty mingled with the sacred privacy of sleep? You fold the cap back neatly and run a thumb across one embroidered edge. There's a tiny initial. You imagine someone named Margaret, or maybe Maud, darning it by candlelight, muttering about the cold while her husband snores beside her like a dying accordion. You bet she added the frills just to spite him. And yes, the term nightcap does double duty. Because while your head might have had its own sleepwear, so did your stomach. A little drink before bed? Of course. The nightcap was a sacred Victorian tradition. Usually something like warm milk with brandy, or a thimble of port. Enough to settle the nerves without starting a tavern brawl with yourself. You remember trying a Victorian recipe once. Milk, nutmeg, brandy, and a drop of rosewater. It tasted like a spiced sleep potion from a fairy tale. You passed out on the couch 23 minutes later. Coincidence? Maybe, but it definitely beat scrolling your phone until your brain turned into digital mulch. The nightcap drink was part science, part ritual. Alcohol in small doses acts as a depressant, lulling the nervous system just enough to tip you into slumber. Just don't overdo it. Victorian doctors warned that too much liquor before bed led to night terrors, flatulence, and a troubled conscience. 3 things no one wants as a bedtime companion. You chuckle softly, thinking of a Victorian man shuffling into the kitchen in a floor-length nightshirt. Cap asks you to warm his nightly toddy over the hearth. Maybe he adds an extra splash of gin and tells himself it's for his neuralgic tremors. Maybe he just likes gin. There were even sleep tonics sold over the counter, many containing ingredients we now reserve for sci-fi or horror movies. Laudanum, for example, a mix of alcohol and opium, was a common nightcap for those with more Victorian problems. They called it a solution for everything from headaches to heartbreak. You can't help but picture some poor soul nodding off in a velvet chair, cup still warm in their hand, dreams tinted amber and strange. But for the average household, the nightcap was simple, predictable, and oddly intimate. A small act of self-care before a long night. The fire dwindles, the curtains are drawn, and there you are, sipping from a cracked porcelain cup, feeling the day unravel at last. You sigh. You understand the appeal. And then there's the sound. The little clink of ceramic, the soft creak of bedsheets, the rustle of linen as someone adjusts their nightcap or folds it neatly under their pillow. It all blends into a sleepy soundscape, like ASMR before microphones were invented. There's something satisfying about rituals like these. Not glamorous, not efficient, but comforting. And comfort, especially at night, is underrated. Today's sleep advice is all blue light and melatonin gummies. Back then, it was, wear this funny hat and drink your nutmeg milk. Honestly, they might have had a point. You run your fingers over the folded cap one last time and place it back where it was, nestled between the sachet and the morning brooch. Your sleepy little museum of night. You lie back, letting your breath deepen. The image of a Victorian bedroom slips into your mind, dimly lit, faintly chilled, and full of layered rituals. You picture a woman unpinning her hair, brushing it precisely 100 strokes before winding it into a braid. A man folding his coat with military precision before climbing under heavy blankets. A child whispering prayers into the dark, holding a rag doll by one ear. And in every bed, a cap. Frilly or pointed, silly or solemn. Hold down low, like a soft helmet for the battle against dreams. The moonlight has shifted again, slipping further across the room. You close your eyes and feel yourself slipping with it. Somewhere between your modern life and that slower, starchier world of rituals and ruffles. Maybe tonight, in your dreams, you'll try on a nightcap. Just for a minute. Just to see. The clock's faint ticking feels like a metronome to your slow descent into dreams. Your mind wanders to one of the Victorian era's most peculiar nighttime rituals, the darkness test. Yes, it sounds ominous, but it was part superstition, part proto-science, and entirely bizarre. You imagine a room shrouded in darkness, save for the flicker of a candle's dying flame. The household gathers quietly, watching as one brave soul closes their eyes and attempts to navigate the shadows. The goal? To see if the darkness could reveal anything hidden. A ghost, a spirit, or perhaps just an unspoken truth lurking in the corners. Historians still argue whether this practice was widespread or confined to the eccentric upper classes who could afford seances and spirit boards. But what's undeniable is that the Victorians had an obsession with the unseen world. They inhabited a liminal space between the age of reason and the dawn of modern psychology, where shadows weren't just absence of light, they were canvases for fear and fascination. The darkness test was sometimes a challenge, a dare to prove one's bravery, or to invite the unknown in. Some believed that if you stared long enough into the void, your eyes would adjust, and you might glimpse phantoms or premonitions. Others thought it a form of meditation, forcing your mind to confront the silent spaces between thoughts. You chuckle softly, picturing a Victorian gentleman fumbling in pitch-black rooms, muttering balderdash under his breath while bumping into furniture, all in the name of spooky science. And yet, there's something poetic about it. The human urge to seek meaning in mystery, even if it means fumbling blindfolded through the dark. Your own bedroom is well lit now, but you let your eyes close and imagine the thick velvet curtains drawn tight, shutting out every hint of moonlight. The darkness envelopes you, pressing gently against your skin. You can almost feel the suspense, the charged anticipation of what might emerge from the blackness. It's not just about ghosts or spirits, though. The darkness test also served as a metaphor for confronting the unknown in one's life. Fear, grief, the unspoken secrets that lurk just beneath polite conversation. The Victorians had a way of externalizing inner turmoil through elaborate rituals, and this was no exception. You think about how modern society has mostly abandoned these rituals, trading them for scientific explanations or psychological therapy. But maybe there's something missing when we stop facing our darkness so directly. Sometimes, you feel like sitting quietly in your own dark room, without distractions, just to see what stirs in the shadows. Of course, you'd never admit that out loud. Not when there's a comfy bed waiting and a perfectly good nightcap beside you. You drift deeper, the imagined darkness curling around you like a soft cloak, whispering secrets only the brave dare listen to. Outside, the night holds its breath, waiting. The night deepens, and you're wrapped in a soft, semi-conscious haze. Your thoughts drift to a ritual that's oddly practical and a bit macabre, the Victorian practice of graveyard dust, used in home remedies. Not the kind of stuff you want to Google right before bed, but stick with me. Victorians believed in the curative powers of earth, and graveyard soil had a particular reputation. In some folk traditions, a pinch of dirt from a freshly turned grave was thought to ward off illnesses or evil spirits. You imagine a weary mother scooping up a handful under the cover of darkness, heart pounding, just to save her sick child. A desperate ritual born from the limits of medicine at the time. Historians still argue how widespread and serious these practices were. Some say it was limited to rural folk medicine. Others suggest it crept into urban superstition and even polite society's secret cupboards. The rational side of you cringes at the thought. Imagine the germs, the actual science fail. Yet, you can't help but admire the inventiveness and raw humanity behind these actions. When traditional remedies failed, when doctors were scarce or costly, people grasped at any hope, no matter how grim or strange. It wasn't just about healing. Graveyard dust had a symbolic weight. It was a connection to death, a way to borrow strength from those who'd passed on. Like carrying a talisman made of soil and memory. You wonder if any of your Victorian ancestors ever resorted to this. Maybe it's why you're fascinated by strange old customs, because deep down, they're stories of survival, resilience, and hope dressed in black lace and sometimes grave dirt. And as your breath slows and your mind folds into quiet, you sense that even in the oddest rituals, there's a strange beauty. The way humans try to make sense of loss, illness, and fear, sometimes with science, sometimes with superstition, but always with heart. The room is still. The night that you let the weight of these old stories settle as your eyelids close fully. You awaken just for a moment to the gentle creak of wood settling. Your ears pick up a faint rustle, maybe a draft, maybe an unsettled curtain. Your mind meanders to the strange Victorian practice of night soil collection, a euphemism for something far less pleasant, human waste. It's the kind of thing history books gloss over, but the Victorians had no such shame, at least not publicly. Cities before modern plumbing were cesspools of ingenuity and, well, odor. Night soil men, or gong farmers, as they were sometimes called in earlier centuries, would cart away the refuse under cover of darkness. The ritual was practical, keeping the streets clean, or as clean as possible, but also carried an odd sense of social order. You picture those workers trudging through cobbled streets, lanterns swinging, wearing heavy boots and grim expressions, their carts creaking under the weight of the city's unwanted burdens. They were both reviled and indispensable. Historians still argue whether this nighttime sanitation was a necessity born of public health or a deeply ingrained class ritual, the unseen labor of the poor maintaining the polished lives of the rich. The Victorians themselves often ignored the stench of their success, preferring to sweep dirt under carpets and curtains. But the night soil wasn't just waste to be dumped, it was valuable. Farmers bought it as fertilizer, closing the cycle between urban filth and rural growth. It's an uncomfortable thought, but it speaks to the Victorian capacity to find utility in even the most repugnant places. This strange dance between sanitation, class, and commerce tells you more about Victorian society than their corsets or etiquette manuals ever could. The same night that you slip on a nightcap or clasp a mourning brooch, unseen workers are reclaiming the city's waste, preserving the illusion of cleanliness for those upstairs. You pull the blanket tighter and settle back. The echo of footsteps and lantern light fade. You imagine the city's secrets, whispered in the dark, carried away one cartload at a time. In the quiet, you realize every night is layered, comfort for some, toil for others, and stories hidden beneath it all. The room feels cooler now, as if the night air itself has slipped through the cracks. Your thoughts drift to a curious Victorian nighttime superstition, the witching hour. That fabled time when the boundary between the living and the dead supposedly thinned, often pegged at midnight or 3 a.m., depending on who you ask. You imagine a fog-laden London street, gas lamps flickering, shadows twisting in alleys as church clocks toll the witching hour. People locked their doors, pulled curtains tight, and muttered prayers or charms to keep restless spirits at bay. The Victorians, obsessed with death and the afterlife, infused the night with a mystical dread and fascination. Historians still argue whether the witching hour was a widespread cultural belief or more of a literary invention fueled by Gothic novels and sensational newspapers. But regardless, it shaped how Victorians experienced the night, imbuing ordinary hours with a supernatural charge. The witching hour wasn't just about ghosts. It was also linked to insomnia and the eerie quiet that settles in those dark, lonely moments. You know the feeling. Wide awake when everyone else is asleep, heart a little too loud in the silence. Victorians developed rituals to protect themselves, sleeping with amulets, reciting verses, or simply refusing to be alone at those hours. Some even kept witch bottles, glass jars filled with pins, nails, and urine to trap malevolent spirits. You have to admire their creativity, even if it's a little unsettling. You lie back, letting the silence stretch. The witching hour might be a myth, a psychological quirk, or a collective anxiety about darkness and the unknown. But its influence lingers, whispering in the corners of old houses and the pages of dusty books. And maybe, just maybe, that restless energy that creeps at night is a shared human experience, transcending centuries and superstitions. You close your eyes, imagining the clock striking midnight somewhere far away, and the world holding its breath in those strange, shadowy minutes. You feel your breath slow as you imagine Victorian bedrooms bathed in the soft glow of candlelight, the flickering flames casting shadows that dance along the walls. Tonight, your mind turns to one of the era's more curious rituals, the use of lavender and other aromatic herbs for sleep. Not just for scent, but as a supposed safeguard against bad dreams and restless spirits. Lavender was a staple in Victorian households. People tucked sprigs under pillows, placed sachets in drawers, or burned bundles in their rooms. The fragrance was believed to soothe the mind, calm the nerves, and create a protective aura around the sleeper. You can almost smell that faint floral scent mixing with the musty linen sheets and wood polish. Historians still debate whether these herbal rituals were primarily practical, lavender has mild sedative properties, or whether they were more deeply entwined with superstition and folklore. Probably a bit of both. The Victorians had a unique blend of science and superstition, often relying on both in their quest for a good night's rest. Interestingly, lavender also played a role in Victorian mourning customs. It was thought to purify the air, especially around the sick or dying, helping to ward off disease or spiritual contamination. You imagine someone arranging a small bouquet in a mourning chamber, the scent mingling with heavy velvet and the bittersweet scent of grief. You remember reading that the Victorians sometimes went to extreme lengths to create these aromatic environments, layering their bedrooms with dried flowers, sachets, and incense, turning the act of going to sleep into a sensory ritual. It wasn't just about falling asleep, it was about entering a safe, sacred space between the day and the unknown of night. You reach out as if you could touch those lavender bundles. There's comfort in the idea of smell anchoring you, wrapping you in a gentle embrace as the world fades. You think about your own nighttime habits, perhaps less floral, but no less ritualistic in their way. And as you sink back into the quiet, the faint scent of lavender drifts through the imaginary Victorian air, inviting your mind to wander softly into dreams. You feel your breath slow as you imagine Victorian bedrooms bathed in the soft glow of candlelight, the flickering flames casting shadows that dance along the walls. Tonight, your mind turns to one of the era's more curious rituals, the use of lavender and other aromatic herbs for sleep. Not just for scent, but as a supposed safeguard against bad dreams and restless spirits. Lavender was a staple in Victorian households. People tucked sprigs under pillows, placed sachets in drawers, or burned bundles in their rooms. The fragrance was believed to soothe the mind, calm the nerves, and create a protective aura around the sleeper. You can almost smell that faint floral scent mixing with the musty linen sheets and wood polish. Historians still debate whether these herbal rituals were primarily practical, lavender has mild sedative properties, or whether they were more deeply entwined with superstition and folklore. Probably a bit of both. The Victorians had a unique blend of science and superstition, often relying on both in their quest for a good night's rest. Interestingly, lavender also played a role in Victorian mourning customs. It was thought to purify the air, especially around the sick or dying, helping to ward off disease or spiritual contamination. You imagine someone arranging a small bouquet in a mourning chamber, the scent mingling with heavy velvet and the bittersweet scent of grief. You remember reading that the Victorians sometimes went to extreme lengths to create these aromatic environments, layering their bedrooms with dried flowers, sachets, and incense, turning the act of going to sleep into a sensory ritual. It wasn't just about falling asleep, it was about entering a safe, sacred space between the day and the unknown of night. You reach out as if you could touch those lavender bundles. There's comfort in the idea of smell anchoring you, wrapping you in a gentle embrace as the world fades. You think about your own nighttime habits, perhaps less floral, but no less ritualistic in their way. And as you sink back into the quiet, the faint scent of lavender drifts through the imaginary Victorian air, inviting your mind to wander softly into dreams. The night wraps around you like a thick quilt, muffling the outside world into a hush. Your thoughts drift to one of the Victorian era's stranger bedtime practices, the use of bed warmers. No, it's not just a euphemism for snuggling under the covers. These were literal metal pans filled with hot coals, slid between the sheets before bedtime. Imagine the scene: a servant carefully carrying a bed warmer from the hearth to the bedroom, steam rising from its iron belly. The pan was often attached to a long handle, so it could be safely moved without singeing anyone. The goal? To heat the bed, chase away nighttime chills, and make those freezing stone floors a little less cruel. This ritual was both practical and a sign of status. Not every household could afford the servants or the fuel to keep the coals burning. Bed warmers were especially popular in colder months, when Victorian houses turned into frigid tombs at night. You picture the cozy glow of firelight in a chamber, the faint smell of smoke mingling with lavender and candle wax. Historians still debate whether the risks, burns, fires, even carbon monoxide poisoning outweigh the comforts of a preheated bed. Some argue that bed warmers were an essential part of Victorian domestic life. Others say they were a dangerous luxury that faded as central heating advanced. You can almost feel the contrast: the warmth of the metal against the cold sheets, the anticipation of slipping into a toasty nest, and the servant's quiet footsteps echoing in the hallway. There's a rhythm to these nighttime preparations, a choreography between comfort and caution. The bed warmer also symbolizes the era's tension between innovation and tradition. It's a reminder that Victorian life balanced on the edge of old habits and new technology, a dance that still influences how we prepare for sleep today. As your breath slows and your eyelids flutter, you imagine the gentle warmth spreading beneath the covers, coaxing you into rest. The bed warmer's glow fades into the soft darkness, a silent guardian of comfort in the cold night. The quiet of the night is punctuated only by your steady breathing and the soft creak of the house settling. Your thoughts slip to the Victorian fascination with dream journals, a practice that sounds surprisingly modern in its intent. People of the era were captivated by dreams, not just as idle fantasy but as potential windows into the subconscious or even prophetic glimpses of the future. You imagine a dimly lit boudoir, a neatly penned leather-bound notebook resting on a bedside table beside a flickering candle. After waking from sleep, a Victorian gentleman or lady would jot down the fragments of their dreams, images, feelings, strange symbols, in careful script. Some believed that dreams could reveal hidden truths or guide decisions. Others saw them as divine messages or warnings. Historians still debate whether these journals were a widespread practice or limited to intellectuals and spiritualists. But what's clear is that the Victorians were among the first to treat dreams with serious curiosity, long before the rise of psychoanalysis. The act of recording dreams was a kind of nighttime ritual, a bridge between sleep and waking, between mystery and understanding. And the journals themselves often contained not just dreams but commentary, reflections, and even sketches, turning the ephemeral into tangible stories. You think about how this echoes today, with apps and blogs dedicated to dream interpretation and mindfulness. The Victorian Dream Journal, in a way, was an early attempt at self-exploration through the night's strange theater. You picture yourself picking up such a journal, scribbling down your own restless night visions, perhaps a curious Victorian ancestor watching over you, smiling at the shared human urge to make sense of the unseen. As your thoughts fade into quiet, you sense the lingering magic of those written dreams, tucked between the pages, waiting to be rediscovered when the morning light arrives. The night has deepened further, and your breathing has slowed into the rhythm of near sleep. Your mind wanders to the Victorian era's fascination with sleep paralysis, a mysterious and terrifying experience still not fully understood today. Known in folklore as the old hag, this phenomenon was often interpreted as a visit from a malevolent spirit pressing down on the sleeper's chest, trapping them between waking and dreaming. You picture a Victorian bedroom dimly lit by candles, where a frightened sleeper lies rigid and unable to move, eyes wide with silent terror. The old tales told of witches, demons, or restless ghosts responsible for this paralysis. The Victorians didn't have the neuroscience explanations we do now, so these episodes were often woven into the night's tapestry of superstition and fear. Historians still argue about how Victorian society viewed sleep paralysis. Was it a common folk belief or an elite medical curiosity? Some doctors began to document it as a genuine medical condition, while spiritualists embraced it as proof of the supernatural. It's chilling to think how personal and cultural interpretations of the same experience could differ so wildly. You reflect on your own brush with sleep paralysis, if you've ever had it, and the strange overlap of science and myth that shadows our nights. In some cases, Victorians used protective rituals, like placing a Bible under the pillow, reciting prayers, or sleeping with a silver coin, to ward off the old hag's grip. Others sought comfort in the company of a loved one, trusting that shared presence could banish the dark. You let your mind drift, imagining the quiet bravery it took to face these night terrors, the resilience of a society balancing between reason and mystery. You realize that, despite all the progress, the night still holds its shadows and secrets, and the old hag still waits, somewhere in the liminal space between sleep and wakefulness. You sigh softly, embracing the paradox, fear and comfort, science and superstition, woven into the Victorian night, and perhaps into your own. The night whispers softly around you as you drift toward full sleep, thoughts turning to one final Victorian ritual that encapsulates much of what you've learned, the practice of death masks. When someone died, a wax or plaster cast of their face was made, an eerie yet intimate way to preserve a loved one's features forever. You imagine a dimly lit parlor, heavy with grief, where family members watch as an artist carefully molds the mask. It's a strange blend of mourning and memorial, a physical connection to the departed that was both comforting and unsettling. Historians still debate whether death masks were more about preserving memory or confronting mortality head-on. Some say it was a way for Victorians to accept death's permanence. Others argue it was a morbid fascination with the face frozen in time. These masks weren't just personal keepsakes, they were also used in art, science, and even criminal investigations, blurring the line between the sacred and the scientific. You reflect on how this practice mirrors the Victorian obsession with death rituals, mourning jewelry, and post-mortem photography, all attempts to capture what's fleeting and to make sense of loss. As you lie in your bed, the idea of a death mask feels strangely peaceful, a reminder that even in darkness, humans seek to remember, to hold on, and to find beauty amid sorrow. Your breath deepens, and the quiet hum of the night wraps around you like a gentle lullaby. The shadows of Victorian nights fade into the calm of your room, carrying with them stories of strange rituals, fears, and hopes. You feel your mind soften, drifting slowly through the final folds of wakefulness into rest. The night grows still now, and your thoughts slow to a gentle rhythm, softening like a whisper against your skin. Imagine yourself sinking deeper into your bed, the fabric cool and welcoming, wrapping around you like a familiar embrace. The strange and curious stories of the Victorian night begin to fade, replaced by the quiet hum of the present moment, the steady pulse of your breath, the faint rustle of the world settling down around you. There's comfort in knowing that across centuries, people have grappled with the same mysteries of darkness and sleep, weaving rituals that reflect their hopes, fears, and resilience. As your eyelids grow heavy, you carry with you a sense of connection to those shadowed nights, the whispered prayers, the flickering candles, the soft scents of lavender and smoke. Let your mind drift freely now, untethered from the weight of day, guided gently toward peaceful dreams. The past and present blend seamlessly here, in this quiet space between waking and sleep, where stories linger like a soft melody. Rest easy, knowing that the night holds you safely, and when morning comes, the world will greet you anew. Good night.